Hello everyone and welcome to the live stream on quite a chilly Wednesday in Spain. Beautiful during the day, of course, sunshine, t-shirts, but it gets a little bit parky mornings and evenings. Anyway, enough of the weather report. Welcome to the live stream, as I say, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. Thanks for joining us. And if you're watching this, listening to this retrospectively, welcome anyway. Lots to talk about. Qatar, wow. Whoever could have predicted? I think we could predict that Max might win the Qatar Grand Prix going into it, but whoever would have predicted that McLaren would make such a mess of it? This is my iPhone just telling me that I'm live. Okay, press the wrong volume button. There we go. Just totally unexpected error. Own goal by McLaren. What comes if you've got a great car and you're just out there winning the race? You don't know what to do next. Rabbit in the headlights. And so we move on to Abu Dhabi, which will be the scene of yet another finale. I think, logically, not only does Lando have the advantage of a points difference, which is huge, of course, in terms of track position and everything else. If he's out there in the front, it's going to be very difficult to do anything about him. But beyond that, of course, the McLaren MCL39 is the best car out there. I've no doubt about that. And and Mark Slade and others have often said that as well. And so there's no reason to think, sadly, in terms of those that want a really close finale, that McLaren won't be on the front row. They'll definitely be good around qualifying laps of Abu Dhabi. In the race, obviously, Max can come up with stuff now that McLaren can't even dream of, and it could be different. But anyway, we'll see. I like to say all that stuff because Rob Walker, who, as you all know, was one of the great British private entrants in Formula One, entered Stirling Moss amongst many others, Joe Siffert, Joe Bonnier, and won a lot of Grand Prix. And indeed, he won Lotus' first Formula One race with Stirling. So Rob was a very good friend of mine, a mentor almost, a wonderful gentleman, a journalist and a team owner in his day. And Rob always used to bet against himself in the hope that his horse would win. I'm talking horses now. That his horse would win, and then he'd feel wonderful, even if it lost money on the whole thing. And so I'm kind of saying that as well, because I'm not in any way anti-McLaren. I'm not. I'm a massive fan of McLaren, always have been. I have Bruce's autograph in my autograph book. But I do think Max is the driver of 2025, and I do think he, all being equal, he is the deserving world champion this year in terms of what he's delivered with the packages that he's had. And so if Max was to be world champion, I think it'd be a great ending to the year. If it's going to be a McLaren driver, who is the more deserving? It's a really interesting point. I've got a poll at the moment on my YouTube channel under the community section. So put your opinion there. It's a good question, isn't it? Who is the more deserving McLaren driver of the World Championship? Is it Oscar Piastri, who's come in with relatively little experience, shown unbelievable pace for many of the races, admittedly gone off the boil quite dramatically in the second half of the year for some of that period, but nonetheless been very fast and very, very quick and capable of beating Lando one-on-one? Or is it Lando Norris, who's paved the way at McLaren and been there for a long time, to some extent carries a lot of McLaren DNA on his shoulders and is therefore responsible for what we have today, a wonderful car? And is Lando therefore the deserving world champion because of the races he's won, going out of sight with incredible rhythm and feel and corner entries as wide as they are relative to Max? He's got great touch when he's, dare I say it, on form. Good question. Who is the more deserving of the two? Let's have your opinion on that. Anyway, with no more ado, I thought I would chat to Mark Slade, recorded interview. Just did it literally half an hour ago, about his retrospective thoughts on Qatar. Now that the dust has settled, as a race engineer, what does he think about what happened there? And looking forward to Abu Dhabi as well. So here's Mark Slade with his... So Mark, 3 days on, I'm just wondering whether from a race engineer's perspective, whether the events at the McLaren pit wall and the resultant actions on the track have made any more sense to you.
Well, if anything, it's just got worse the more I've thought about it. It's just so difficult to sort of understand well, not understand the thought process, but understand the background behind it, the reason why the decisions were made the way they were. I can understand why the first car on the road, you are the one that's got everything to lose, and it is the most difficult place to be to make a choice like that when it comes to a safety car. And the further back you are, the easier it gets. You know, right at the back, you have absolutely nothing to lose. But the situation was that I would have thought they'd have done the prep in the morning to see that in that situation, the most likely thing was that everyone else would stop, because with 2 stops to make, it's a guaranteed 10-second gain. So that's the bit I don't get. The fear of failure, I think, is what's come into it, and the risk of failing actually was more that you would lose out by not stopping than by stopping. But because they were terrified, I suppose, about trying to give equality to the 2 drivers, so worrying about whether they could stop both of them at the same time, knowing that stopping Lando the next lap was going to put him a long way down the order. I guess all that just overwhelmed them in the moment and led to them making a poor choice. I think for Max, he has to win or try to win every race, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So as soon as he saw that Oscar hadn't stopped, it was a no-brainer for him to come in. Yeah. I don't know if they made a box to overtake call, but it was just it probably didn't feel like it on the Red Bull pit wall, but actually it was an easy choice. And once that choice was made for everyone behind, including Lando, it should have been a no-brainer to follow him in. But that's the next point where it goes wrong, isn't it?
We've talked, you and I, quite a lot about strategy departments and the race engineer's job on the pit wall and the interface thereof. And I'm assuming that in the strategy department at McLaren, there was a point at which they must have known that if a safety car came out, it would be better to come in and change tyres in that situation. And I'm wondering whether they've got themselves to the point now where, for example, it might have said, if a safety car comes out after lap 10, we will come in. And they're so rigid now in terms of the way they look at their numbers that it was, oh no, it was only lap 7, we'll keep him out. Was that a possibility that they're getting into that situation?
It is quite possible, yeah, because the strategists will have worked very hard overnight and come up with a whole range of scenarios. They will have determined the cut-off points where decisions like that would be made. And quite possibly they had decided that a later lap was the point where they thought people would stop. But the simple fact is that lap 7 was where you could do the rest of the race and stay within Pirelli's maximum lap count for a set of tyres. So in reality, it was set by that. And they didn't really need to bring other factors into it, really, because that was the deciding factor.
But the other point was, of course, that when they did come in and then go out again, they were both in traffic.
Yeah.
The strategists are not able to predict that, though, are they? Or are they?
No, they should have been able to predict that. And in fact, this is what makes it really bad, in my opinion, is that Fernando actually gave them a lucky break. I mean, it would have been far worse if Fernando hadn't been tyre saving in the way he did, and such that Oscar was able to stop without only losing the position to Max, but for Lando only losing, what was it, another 2-3 positions.
Yeah.
If Fernando had driven at a regular pace, they'd have been buried in the midfield. And whilst there was some thought that Oscar might be able to catch back up to Verstappen, Max at towards the end, if it had played out without Fernando's involvement, he'd have had no chance whatsoever. So this is the thing that I don't understand, is where the risk of that occurrence coming in didn't play a bigger factor in the decision-making process. But it's very easy to say in hindsight, I know, and I'm fully aware of how irritating it can be to hear what everyone else thinks after the event when you're in that position. I've been there, and it's horrific, but it does show a definite weakness in the thought process coming in, because they had such a fantastic car that weekend. I mean, the circuit was made for their car. Oscar was just absolutely on top form. I mean, Lando made a small mistake in qualifying that put him P2. He just wasn't getting turns 4, 5, and 7 quite right, going in a little bit too aggressively. But it was a weekend that was made for them to be a solid 1-2.
What did you make of Will Joseph's comment that in staying out, we're giving ourselves more flexibility at the end of the race, and everybody else has lost that flexibility? What do you make of that?
That was just fluster, wasn't it? That was just, we've made a terrible choice. I'm sure he's been straight on the radio to the strategist saying, you know, what are we doing? What can I say? And in the heat of the moment, there was the flustered response of it just gives them more flexibility. But
which is nonsense, of course.
It was the opposite. Yeah. It put them in the tightest of corners.
Yeah.
And so that was just what can I say to try and not make it seem so bad.
Mark, you've correctly pointed out how well Oscar was driving in Qatar. How do you see it now going into Abu Dhabi? Everybody's saying, of course, that Abu Dhabi is a great circuit for Lando, should be good race for him. But I can't see Oscar now being slow in Abu Dhabi. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't see why he should be. But then I didn't really see why he struggled.
Yeah,
he did in some of the previous races.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say Brazil, Interlagos. Lando was absolutely brilliant on his corner entries. Turn 1, turn 4, he was just on fire there.
Yeah,
and in a similar way to how Oscar was in Qatar. So I'm not sure why either of them should struggle going into Abu Dhabi. I think it's another circuit that will suit their car very well because of the mix of corners. Slightly lower speed in general, so maybe not quite as big an advantage as they had in Qatar. But it should suit them very well, and they should both perform very well. I mean, realistically, we should still be looking at Lando winning the championship if all things go as they should. But this sort of situation can always occur again. And who knows what the outcome of that would be.
The Red Bull RB21 is so irascible now. It's almost a question of, do you think this will be a good weekend or a bad weekend for it? It's almost impossible to predict it, I think. But what are your thoughts on how that car should go around Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, it could well be net best of the rest. I think it'd be nip and tuck between the Red Bull and the Mercedes as to which will be the next best car. It's still not as good a car as the McLaren. I mean, you could see in Qatar that Max was struggling in the high speed corners, 13, 14, 15. He just wasn't as quick as the McLarens were, which was true, in fact, of pretty much every other car, surprisingly, except the Ferrari, which was still slower than the McLarens in those corners, but actually about the next quickest car. The problem for Ferrari was that
Max was quite good in sectors 1 and 2 in the back half of the race, wasn't he? Even compared with Oscar.
Yeah. I mean, the race
is that a pointer for Abu Dhabi or not?
I suppose what I'm talking about is the difference between race pace and qualifying pace.
Yeah.
I think in the qualifying scenario, the McLaren should be head and shoulders above the others. Well, not head and shoulders, but it should be a couple of tenths, which in Formula 1 terms is head and shoulders. Come the race, those differences do reduce. It looks like the Red Bull's very good on its tyres with Max managing very well. So that's going to make it a slightly different scenario and give him the sniff of the victory, and he just finds that extra little bit, doesn't he? But
yeah, and if they were going to have a bouncing problem going into Abu Dhabi, at least that's shown up in Qatar, and you're imagining they're going to hit the ground running in terms of that area of the setup.
You would think so. I think they did struggle a bit, didn't they, getting the car up to speed through Friday and Saturday. I think it was that high speed, low speed, or it's the high speed and medium speed that are the big problems for most cars other than the Ferrari. If anything, I think the Red Bull will be a little bit closer in Abu Dhabi because there are more of the lower speed corners, that whole sector 3, and obviously you've got the hairpin leading onto the long straight. But turns 2, 3, very high speed. And then you've got the long corner at the end of the second straight, which should be a great McLaren corner, as should the right-hander. You've got the very fast right, and then a right-hander into the sort of, should we say, the marina section of the track, and the McLaren should be very strong on those entries there. But we shall see.
McLaren should be a fun pit wall to be on in Abu Dhabi, particularly if things are not going as they expect. And let's say, for example, Max is leading, and say Oscar's second, and Lando's somewhere in fourth place, and there's a decision to be made with 3 laps to go as to what they might do. That'll be quite fun.
I think the most difficult thing is going to be, how do they play off their 2 drivers at McLaren? Do they win? It seems inevitable they'll come to a point where they'll need one or the other to help the other driver by slowing up the field to hold up Max. Are they going to do it, or are they not going to do it? That's a decision they have to make, and I think it comes down to priorities, doesn't it? At the end of it, you have to decide what you actually want to do, and I think they haven't really. They've said to the drivers they're going to be fair, but in being fair, they've actually been unfair in many ways. And do you actually have to sit down with your drivers and say, in this situation, we have no choice but to ensure that one of our drivers wins the championship? But you would think, but I'm not sure that is actually how it's going to play out.
No, particularly as you point out, it could well be a McLaren front row, and you've got those 2 going into turn 1 side by side.
Yeah. It could be. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be, because they do have the best car, and 2 drivers who are very good at getting the most out of it within a tenth and a half of each other. So we shall see. But it will be an interesting weekend. It'll be an incredibly high pressure weekend. And in a way, again, this is what makes it more enjoyable for Red Bull in some ways, because they still have little to lose. They can just go for it. I'm sure it won't feel like that necessarily at the time. And Max will be very, very demanding because he sniffs that 5th championship. But that's all part of the excitement of it from the engineering point of view. I think they will enjoy the weekend. And even if they don't lose, they'll come out of it thinking that they gave McLaren a very good run for it. And rightly so. So it's going to be a fascinating weekend to watch.
Mark, as ever, great chatting to you. We'll talk again to you soon, maybe over the weekend as well. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mark Slade, big thanks to him. As ever, great input, having the race engineer's view on all of their things. Did I say MCL32 earlier? It must have been all that talk about just having come off it, about Fernando, thinking of that terrible McLaren Honda he raced. Was it 2017, I think, that MCL32? Anyway, I meant MCL39, the beautiful Rob Marshall car that has been doing so well in 2025, and congratulations to Rob along the way. News, of course, is that Arvid Lindblad is joining Racing Bulls, replacing, well, who is he replacing? It's a good question, really. I mean, Yuki Tsunoda, ciao. Welcome to the A-team to Zak Hadjar. No surprise there. That was always going to happen, really, wasn't it? So lovely team for next year, I think, for Red Bull. Max Verstappen, Zak Hadjar, very good. Zak, he's quite emotional. He's an emotional guy, and I think that's probably one area where he will benefit enormously from being alongside Max. He'll start to feed off Max's stability and the way he goes about racing, the way he lives his life. Really, I think he's bright enough, Zak, to watch and listen and learn, and he'll be doing that. And he has a great touch behind the wheel, so that's a great move for him. A good move for Red Bull. I think it's a very good team, very strong team. And the big question then was Racing Bulls, what are they going to do? Well, Liam Lawson's kept his drive, which is good news for him. He's definitely improved in the last 6 months. He's, I think, a little bit like Carlos Sainz, sort of resigning himself to, this is the way I drive, and I'm just going to polish it now and make it work for me. I think he's found a little bit of a sweet spot, not in the way Carlos. It took Carlos quite a long time to do that. And Liam's still got, obviously, time ahead of him for that. But he can put together a race now pretty well, pretty consistently, and that's a good thing. And he's a good guy to have Arvid Lindblad in his first season. He's a good guy to be leading that team now. And I think that sense of seniority will also enhance Liam's perspective, and he'll be a better driver for that too. So a pretty good team. Red Bull's choice of Arvid, we'll wait and see. They obviously think he's super good. But, I don't know. It's so far, I mean, I've only seen him very briefly in Formula One and obviously watched him in F2. He doesn't look to be a sort of Isaac Hadjar short corner driver to me, but we'll see where that goes. He certainly looks like a Formula One driver. He looks the Red Bull part, and I think that always plays its role with driver selection at Red Bull. More's the pity, but I'm not in any way decrying his opportunity, and let's see how he goes. But on the other side of the coin, delighted to see that our friend Leo Fornaroli managed to clinch the Formula 2 championship in Qatar. We didn't mention it then because there was so much going on, but congratulations to him. Just did a brilliant job, just sealed it and was quick throughout the weekend. Just brilliant to see. And he's been rewarded with a McLaren driver contract. I say rewarded, you know, speak to Alex Palou about that, but there's a lot of guys at McLaren now, but nobody else was taking any interest in him, I don't think. And so all credit to McLaren for getting on board and giving him that some sort of opportunity. Quite what it will lead to remains to be seen, but he's a great guy. I really, really rate him as a driver. His approach, the way he drives, and his general demeanour, I think, is excellent. So good luck to him, and I hope McLaren look after him. It's a bit of a patronising thing to say, but he's a bit. I think he's quite special, and that he's gone this long without a proper Formula One deal speaks volumes for his self-belief and determination, and I hope he keeps that, I think, is what I'm really getting around to saying, because when you get into the McLaren driver pool, there are so many drivers there, and it's so, sim day here and listen in there, and it's all sort of, we just don't want to take away the sharpness of a driver like Leo, because he's really good. Really good, and I hope McLaren give him lots and lots and lots of opportunities. Quite sure where or how, but I hope they do. So just looking at the survey we're doing on the YouTube channel at the moment, the community survey, in which I asked which McLaren driver is more deserving of the 2025 drivers title, and at the moment, from 3,300 votes, which is quite good. No, it's a lot. Thank you very much, everybody who's voted. 53% say Oscar Piastri and 47% Lando Norris. So there you go. And I respect the views of our viewers, because I think all of you are Formula One passionate, and I think all of you can see beyond the sort of gloss and the materialism of sort of Formula One as it's generally presented, and think a little bit more about it. And that's an interesting result, isn't it? And I think it does reflect how well Oscar has driven for so many races this year. And I think a lot of you obviously are thinking that if he's gone off the boil, there must be something more behind it than just Oscar Piastri having trouble. And maybe it all started at Singapore, as we keep saying. And that, of course, in turn leads one to the question of, if he is asked in any way to help Lando in Abu Dhabi, as Mark Slade suggested there, maybe with holding up traffic or maybe even relinquishing a position, if his opportunity of winning the World Championship seems to be fading, will he actually respond to that to help Lando? Definitely, regardless of anything McLaren say to him about being a team player, and if Lando wins it this year, you can win it next year, Oscar. Lando will help you for sure, all that stuff. Sort of 79 revisited Gilles Villeneuve, Jody Scheckter, and look what happened in 1980. The car was terrible. What will Oscar think? I think he'll be thinking of Turn 1 Singapore, won't he? Regardless of what any of us think about that, we know what Oscar thinks about it, which is the only thing that matters. And he wasn't impressed with what Lando did. So I think that will say a lot in terms of his decision-making process. Anyway, I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about as we go into it. So let's get on with the questions and comments. And the first is from, let's have a look. Aaron, hey buddy, often a regular on our show, which is good. 1 second, let me just see if I've lost that box. There we go. Let's bring it back up again. And your comment is, hey Peter, with the odd uptick of crashes this year caused by DRS failures at the end of this regulation cycle, I'm scared of the number of high-speed crashes I think it's another one we might see with active aero front and rear in 26. Do you foresee any possibility of the FIA disallowing the opening of the flaps if there are too many incidents? Well, I do, and I think, and I've expressed my views on this, I'm not comfortable with it at all from a safety point of view. And we only have to look back at Jack Doohan's shunt at Suzuka to see what can happen if something goes wrong with DRS. And beyond that, Kevin Magnussen at Monza, when he was in the Sauber, massive shunt. So things can go wrong. And I think one of the problems is that the FIA have a lot on their plate at the moment. They've gone for an incredibly ambitious new technical regulation, which is much more than just, refurbishing the technical regs in accordance with the changing world. This is a hugely radical thing, and particularly on the power units, obviously. But to go to active aero when they're also changing the DNA of the cars, we're coming away from ground effect cars, and that's a huge thing. And whether they've got enough people there, they've got enough facilities, enough simulations, all the rest of it that you need to be able to cover all bases of this new regulation, I very much doubt. And if there's a problem, for example, with the power units and the energy storage and the push to pass and the racing's really boring and the engines are unreliable, are they going to be worried about fixing the aero problem as well? I don't know. I hope they are. Nothing. I'd hesitate to use the word scared, but it is actually, in my case, I've often gone on about how the potential for a big accident is always still there in Formula One, particularly on the straights, because that's the one area where we don't spend a lot of time and money building runoff area or crash barriers, because we assume that on the straights the cars aren't going to have a problem. But they can touch wheels, as we've seen Lance Stroll generate a couple of occasions on the straight and have a big shunt, or potentially a big shunt. And equally, you can have a problem with the DRS. So I'm worried about that. And I just hope that everything's going to be okay, is all, from a bottom line of a safety point of view. But thanks for raising that again. I think it's a big issue, that. And if I was the FIA, I wouldn't be introducing active aero in the same year that we're introducing other major changes to the cars. I'd be waiting. I wouldn't even have DRS on the cars at all, as you know, and I wouldn't be worried about the top speeds of the cars in terms of how they look, because the fans don't care about that. They may if they're just reading about it on Wikipedia between races, but when they're at a racetrack, whether the cars are doing 300 kilometers an hour, 330 or 290 is completely irrelevant. It's the racing that matters, and nobody can tell the difference anyway. And so I think this whole business of chasing high top speeds is completely spurious. That's my view anyway. Sarosh Soman, another regular. Hey Sarosh, thank you very much for your question. Peter, last question about racing and life in general. And life in general. How do drivers stroke us enjoy hard work, boring stuff, which is very much required in life? Enjoy, I think, is the operative word there. How do they enjoy that? Well, I think, I'm speaking from a very privileged, lucky position of working in an industry that I love. And I can remember the day when I'd been at Warwick Farm, the racetrack in Australia, and I don't know what I was probably 14, I would imagine, and around there, 13, 14. And it was a Monday morning after a great race weekend. I don't think it was an international, it was a national meeting, but it'd been the Horden Trophy or whatever, and Kevin Bartlett, Spencer Martin, all the top drivers, Leo Gagan, Frank Matic had all been there, and I just loved it. And there I was back at school on Monday morning, I can remember walking into the corridor where you go into the school, all the classrooms, and the smell of that wood polish on the wooden floors, and the whole thing just made me, Anyway, I remember thinking, when I grow up, I never, ever want to have a job where I feel like this on a Monday morning. I want to look forward to Monday mornings and really enjoy them. And as I say, I'm privileged and lucky. And I say thanks to God every day that has happened. And I've always loved my Monday mornings because I'm in an industry that I love and feel I understand and feel that I'm kind of in a very small way a part of. And I think that's the key. I think you've got to enjoy what you do. And that's got to be a priority before how can I make as much money as possible and retire when I'm 45 and go and live in the Bahamas. That's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. That's in my experience. Enjoying what you do is number one priority. And number two is minimize the hassle of getting to work. And if possible, operate from home, if not very near the place of work, and get a home near the place of work. And I've always been lucky in that area too. I've always either lived where I work and or live very near. And when I went to Williams, I sold everything and moved up to Didcot and got a converted little barn thing there near Didcot, and it was a 10-minute drive to the factory every day. That's the only way to operate, I think. If you've got a long commute, then it's always a problem too, keeping that up. It's a bit like going to the gym, keeping fit, isn't it? Which inevitably you have to do if you live in a cold climate. You've got to end up going to the gym for your running or your cross training or whatever you're going to do. And if you're going to be struggling 45 minutes in a car to get there, you're not going to keep it up for the 5 or 4 days a week that you have to. You have to be, the gym. When I moved back to London, actually from Williams, I found a gym I liked and then rented a flat near that gym. And that worked for me too. Fitness is very important. But ultimately, loving what you do and enjoying what you do is absolutely critical. Easy for me to say that for all the people who are not in jobs in which they feel comfortable. But it is a goal that we can all achieve. And if you have that, never, ever take it for granted and never worry about how much money you're going to make, because in a way you're ahead of the game already because you're loving your work. And as far as drivers, what is hard work for a driver? I mean, really, there's no racing driver on the planet who should wake up thinking, oh, this is terrible, I'm hating this. Whether it's a sponsor day in a city they don't want to go to, or whether it's a fan zone appearance and signing 1 million autographs, or whether it's going to the gym yet again with that very annoying trainer, all those things are part of the joy of being a racing driver, and every racing driver should love every minute of their lives. There's no excuse for being miserable, in my opinion, if they're lucky enough to be professional race drivers. So thanks for that question, Tarash. Very good one. Another one from you. I thought Leclerc should be one of the drivers of the day in Qatar. Car looked on the edge, no rear grip. I actually thought that he might have been okay with that setup. Is it because the car had no feel, Peter? Yeah, I mean, fast corners, medium speed corners, not too bad, but just general lack of front end and something he can rely on to do something that Charles Leclerc can do, and having to drive that car just like any standard racing driver, sort of get in a bit later, get the power on, make sure everything's settled before he can really get the car straight again. And that's not the way Charles wants to drive. It's very boring, and he could do it, but it was just terrible for Ferrari. And obviously, if they knew the problem, they would fix it. So there's no point in going down any sort of avenue of what is the problem with that car. You can look at areas where it's good and it's bad, and some circuits where it goes well and some where it doesn't. But the bottom line is it's a terrible car in terms of its overall sweet spot of operation. And Charles Leclerc he drove beautifully because he showed in qualifying how knife edgy that car is if you get it slightly wrong. And yet he was always there, wasn't he? Maximising the opportunity, and not quite the George Russell Mercedes in terms of the pack was around him, but he did incredibly well, I thought, in the car, just like you. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to give a driver of the day to Leclerc, no one would have disagreed with that, I don't think. There would have been others worthy of the driver of the day, of course, but there you go. So Rosh Sermon, Hajar to Red Bull. On one side, I'm happy for him, but he is a short corner driver, and now Red Bull will having 2 short corner drivers. Your views, please. Well, yeah. I mean, I've often said that if in a perfect world you have Charles Leclerc match with Carlos Sainz, or Lewis Hamilton with Valtteri Bottas, or indeed Max Verstappen with Sergio Perez, and now he's got a guy who drives a little bit like him. First time that in my opinion, that Max will be in that situation. But yes, I mean, don't forget that being a short corner driver isn't necessarily the line you take. It's being very, very sensitive, subtle, having incredible harmony with the inputs and the dynamic forces around the car and generated by the car, and generally being able to drive on several different lines and make a small mistake and recover from it without losing very much time at all. That is the sign of a driver who's capable also of shortening the entries and getting the car straight mid-corner to have a lovely extended exit straight. So yes, he will be wanting about the same thing from the car as Max, and if the car works for Max, it'll work for Isaac Hadjar. That's for sure. But Isaac's got so many other areas where he's still very raw that it's not as if the engineers, I think, will be okay with that, because there's so many other factors they're going to have to get right, like the strategy, the power harvesting, the push to pass, the active arrow, all the things that are all functional parts of 26 are all there to preoccupy the engineers. So if they're just getting sort of engineering input, putting them in one direction, that's okay. They can live with that. And in terms of, being any sort of competition for Max, there's so many areas in which Zak can learn from Max, and he's obviously behind Max because he's just a young kid, that that'll be a process as well. So I think it's a very good team, and maybe it'll help the engineers post Adrian Newey to have somebody like Zak there driving basically the same way as Max and give them some sort of sense of direction. Yes, if everything's perfect and you've got a great car, it's great to have input from both ends of the operating spectrum. But where Red Bull are, I'm not sure it's that much of a big deal, to be honest. I think it's a good move for them. Alessandra Darango. Hi, Alessandra. Hi, Peter. Red Bull has become famous for radically changing the car over the course of the weekend, turning situations that looked pretty critical on Friday into race-winning machines on Sunday. Yeah, I'm not sure if you spoke to Max on Friday, he would have been convinced that they could have a race-winning machine by Sunday in Qatar. But that's what they did, isn't it? It was just amazing. I mean, it was just a bouncing thing. They got rid of the bouncing without taking away too much of the downforce, which suggests that maybe they didn't actually make a lot of changes to the ride height, and it was more heave stiffness, as Mark Slade suggested. And good luck to them if that's what they did. They obviously did some very good work back at the ranch as well in terms of sim and making changes that would not hurt the car in other areas but resolve the bouncing issue. As you say, they're very, very good at doing that. And I used to say, well, a lot of that is Adrian Newey. He's just so good at operating over a race weekend and sorting out problems. And he is good, and he'll be doing that at Aston Martin, and is doing that at Aston Martin. But I'm sure, the interesting thing is a lot of people there have learnt from that, and they're so good at it now, on their feet, on their toes at doing that. So, yeah, just amazing performance from Red Bull, that turnaround, where they were. The sad thing is that they always have these issues they have to turn around, whereas McLaren don't seem to. And that's obviously the goal for next year, is to go back to where they used to be, which is a car that's good from lap 1 Friday morning. And your question is, how much does focusing on a single driver contribute to manage to do those turnarounds? Yeah, I think it probably does help. It's a good point, isn't it? Because, Yuki actually was quick, wasn't he? Quickish relative to Max. He was quicker in qualifying for the sprint race, and he was quickish on Friday morning as well. And he would only have been saying the same thing, bouncing. So I'm not sure whether it being a Yuki in the car rather than, say, a George Russell made any difference in terms of what Red Bull then did to cure the bouncing. If it had been, if they'd hired, I don't know, Charles Leclerc as the other driver at the beginning of this year, and Charles was saying, I've got no bouncing at all, the car's brilliant, I just need to solve the traction or something, then of course they'd be in a mess, wouldn't they? And I don't know whether Charles would do that, though. I don't think he would. I think any quick driver would be saying what Max is saying. So I don't think that, having a sort of a number one like Max, I don't think that necessarily impacts the team's ability to get a car from midfield to the front of the grid or the center of the podium necessarily. I think that's more to do with the development of the car over a year and how they run the car at races as well. And running the car, but I don't mean curing problems. I mean setup of the car and getting the best from the car when they've got a good platform. Okay, Jez James. Hi, Peter. Out of interest, why do you pronounce Charles Leclerc with a sh as in Charles and not Charles as in King Charles? Because I once asked him how he liked his name to be pronounced, and he said Charles Leclerc. So I do. And that is the French way of pronouncing Charles. It's not Charles, it's Charles. So there you go. And he said specifically Leclerc to me. So, that was when he was in Formula 3, I think. 01 Drew C. Hope you're well. Uncle Peter. Going to be calling me Santa Claus soon, probably. Can I just say that Charles and Lewis looked like they were driving a Fiat, not a Ferrari? Well, it's a bit of an insult to a Fiat, that, isn't it? Depends what Fiat you mean. If you mean a Fiat 124 Coupe of the type we used to have in Australia, I'm insulted. If you mean one of the current things that are sort of amalgamation of Chryslers, then yeah, you're right. If Ferrari keep it up, Williams will win a world championship before they do. Is Ferrari a midfield team? Well, they certainly look like a back of the midfield team in Qatar, and or Qatar, I think is the correct pronunciation now in the West. So I don't know. What can you say about Ferrari? So many years they've been down, and then they've eventually come back for whatever reason. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, there's some reason to do so. The 26 regs are completely new, so the new Ferrari power unit could be brilliant, and with all its electrics, and maybe the car's magically better than everybody else. Let's hope it is for the Ferrari fans out there. And I think we're all kind of Ferrari fans in a way, because if Ferrari going well, it's good for Formula One, isn't it? And it would be wonderful to see Charles winning races again, and Lewis for that matter. So I don't know. It's more difficult now because it's not just about the things that a race team in the old sense of the word can do well. You know, we can get an aero advantage here, or we're going to run lower roll center, or we're going to have more stiffness in the chassis, and we're going to put the fuel here to change the weight distribution. All the things that teams creatively used to be able to do, 6 wheels rather than 4. All those things are gone now, and it's kind of the rule book is there, and there's these tiny nuances of how you harvest the power and what you do with the various components that you can design, but there's not a lot of freedom there on the car. So I don't know. It all comes down to building blocks. It comes down to what you have at the moment that then allows you to go off in another direction in a fairly reliable way, because you know this works and that works, and we have this because that did that, and therefore we can go in this direction. But if you don't have those strong building blocks, and you've made changes that have had made no improvement at all, or you've made 3 changes that have made the car get worse, it's kind of difficult to build and know where you're going. And so Ferrari, I would suspect, have opened the rule book and designed a car around the rule book, and then they're refining it in every way they can, in terms of maybe a bit of weight saving here, maybe a bit of, a versatility of moving weights around from the cockpit backwards, if that's possible, working very hard on fuels and oils and the electric side of it, and hoping that they hit the road with a reliable car. I'm going to win races from reliability and consistency of setup rather than something magical, I would guess. That's roughly where they are, I would imagine. Got a super chat in here, yellow one. Thank you very much. This is from B. Havish Chandra. Oh, hi there. Thanks for your service. A master decipherer for us new fans. Love your chats with Cameron too. Thank you very much. Yeah, Cameron's a great bloke. Putting hype aside, is there a real chance without safety car, etc., given McLaren's pace, for Lando to end up P4? Well, yeah, of course there's a real chance, and anything can happen, as we've seen in a number of races this year. I mean, both McLarens could qualify on the front row. I think that's pretty likely, actually. I think they'll be, as we said with Mark Slade, but first corner's a first corner, and it only takes, let's say Lando's on the pole and Oscar's on the dirty side of the grid, and it only takes Oscar to make a pretty good start and to be where Lando doesn't want him to be, for one of them maybe to lock up a little bit and run wide, and all of a sudden you've potentially got a minor collision, or you've got Max zapping down through a space and taking it, and anything can happen. Reliability can come into play. I mean, Max took that engine hit, didn't he, and in Brazil, and he's now got a fresh power unit. What are the power units like on the McLaren side? So yeah, we've seen Lando retire from the Dutch Grand Prix with oil leak of some description. Vibration probably, I don't know. I suspect that was some sort of vibration thing over the curves, maybe not. But yeah, lots of things can go wrong. There's no doubt about that. But all things being equal, Lando should win the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and thus the World Championship. And there could be a race for P2 between Max and Oscar. If there are no safety car interventions that mess things up or change things around, let's rephrase it like that, or incidents that nobody can predict, then, or nobody can predict accurately, then of course it'll be, the things will change. So yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how it all goes. Could rain, unlikely, of course, in Abu Dhabi, but, I suppose you could say anything could happen. Noah Simeo. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well from South London. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a part of the world that I know pretty well. Why is there such a stigma in Formula One about hiring a personal driver coach or even being seen working with one? Of course, Formula One is a unique sport. But take tennis. Djokovic, arguably the greatest of all time, still works with coaches. And we've seen, let's say, his serve evolve and even re-evolve, getting better with age. Yeah. Part 3, surely drivers like Oscar or Lando who want to reach or surpass Max could benefit from the same approach, and even someone as experienced as Lewis at this stage of his career. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're actually echoing points I've made, exactly that. And my only explanation for drivers like Lando and Oscar not wanting to do that is because, well, one, I think you're right. I don't think they want to be seen to be needing a driver coach. It's it's not a cool thing. Whereas it is cool in tennis or golf to have a serve coach or a short game coach or a driving coach, a long game coach. All these things. Wow, that's so good. Look, we all these different areas they're working on. And I suppose the parallel is to say we now have coaches for all different parts of the car. We have a rear suspension coach, a front suspension coach. We have an aero coach. We have a whatever weight distribution. And we have a strategy coach. You can call them all coaches if you like, and that's part of the sport. But because of that, the driver then thinks, oh, well, I'm just the driver, and I'm a megastar, and nobody can tell me how to drive. I know how to drive, and if I was in the best car, I'd win every race. That's how they all think. So they don't want to be seen with a coach, and they actually think they're really good, and they've got nothing to learn. And Yuki Tsunoda, I'm sure, still thinks that. And that's the reason he's lost his drive, because once he got the Red Bull A drive, I think actually when he was sort of fairly comfortable at racing bulls, he just felt, I'm a Formula One driver. I'm a big star in Japan. Everybody thinks I'm brilliant. And if I'm not winning races, it must be because the car's not great. Sergio Perez philosophy, in other words. And therefore, I've got to have a great car. And I've gone to Red Bull now. I can't believe what Max is able to do with that car. No way he could do that with my car. It would be all that. And yeah, you're right, Yuki. And everybody telling him he's right, all his fans and acolytes around him, and they all say that, and they believe that. They genuinely believe that, and that's why the great drivers are great, because Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, probably George, certainly Isaac Hadjar, Oscar, I think more than Lando, are self-critical, and they are definitely aware that they've got things to do and to learn and to change if they want to get to that high level. And Max still thinks, I can be a better driver, for sure. And that's why he is such a great driver. It's a shame. It's a great shame, because there are coaches around. Rob Wilson is obviously a great example of that, but there are disciples of Rob who could do a similar job, probably, with Rob's supervision, if he really wanted to do it. And all credit to Lance Stroll. He's one of the few drivers that actually does realise that, and he does do quite a lot of days with Rob, although I think he seems to fall off the cliff pretty quickly when he leaves it for too long. But occasionally now he's had the odd day with Rob, and I think he benefits, particularly in the wet. He's very good. But they don't, they just don't think that they need it because they're very good. It's just the Formula One thing. And I've had that conversation with wives, with trainers, with drivers who, in my opinion, just offering, saying, maybe Rob could help here. And they say, oh, there's no way he could benefit from a driver coach. There's nothing a racing driver can learn from a coach. It's different from all other sports. And that's what they all think. So that's why they eventually peter out. But yeah, thanks for mentioning all that. Chris McClelland. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. I am indeed. Thank you very much. One of the things McLaren will really kick themselves about is that if they had pitted, Max probably would have stayed out. Or do you think Red Bull would still have pitted? Oh, no, I think Red Bull would still have pitted, would have come into the pits. To continue my point about Dennis Jenkinson saying that pit is a noun, not a verb. That's no comment other than just to tell people that's what Dennis Jenkinson, the greatest of all British journalists, used to say. And he wrote a column about how pit should not be misused as a verb. And we all obeyed him at the time. So I've kind of always remembered that. Anyway, a bit like Mike Dewson saying you must not misuse the word fantastic, because it's fantastic is derived from the word fantasy, and it should only be used when you are picturing a fantasy. It should never be misused as a synonym of the word good or brilliant or wonderful. Mike Dudson, another great journalist. Anyway, getting back to the point, which was, would Red Bull have stayed out? No, they would have come in. I think everybody knew that was the only way to go. There was no downside to coming in. No downside at all. So that's, and as I think, if you look at the interview, which I think you probably have by now, I did with Mark, and he's still 3 days on. I said, so there must be some saving grace for the decision they made. And he said, no, it's even worse now with 3 days of hindsight than it is when you saw it happening in front of you. So yeah, it was just a really bad call under pressure. And I think they were confused between wanting to be fair between the two drivers, the 25 lap limit on the tyres, and Oscar leading the race and not knowing what everyone else was going to do. And all those three factors together, they just suddenly froze and thought, oh, leave him out. I laugh because it's inappropriate to laugh, because I suppose we're all humans, we're all fallible. We all probably could have made the same mistake. But as Mark pointed out, when Lando said, wouldn't it have been better to have come in? Will said, oh, well, the others have now lost their flexibility for late in the race. And Mark said, what a load of old rubbish. It was the opposite, actually. That was just him coming up with some flannel to explain an incredibly bad decision, which I see that Andrea Stella just called a mistake, nothing more. It's just a mistake. Wheel gun jammed. These things happen. Yeah, right. Jez James again. Hi, Peter. Why would GP tell Max that Kimi allowed Lando through when I doubt there's any truth in such a thing happening? Yeah, that was a bit odd, wasn't it? Because I mean, obviously he didn't see Kimi going off, is all I can say, because it was quite clear that Kimi made a mistake and ran wide, and he rejoined very quickly, but Lando got the run on him. And that's a good point, though. Do they know something that we don't know, and that Kimi did that so it didn't look obvious? I mean, that's basically, if you really wanted to believe what GP was saying, you would have to assume it was that. I don't think that was the case. I don't think those young guys in Formula One are going to fall for that any more than Isaac Hadjar fell for holding up Lando in Singapore when he was about to be passed by Lando. Remember that? They were saying, just to be clear, Lando Norris is coming up behind you. Excuse me, I'm just sorting out the seat fitting here. It's coming up behind you. He said, yeah, I know what to do. And you thought, oh, wow, this is going to be mega. And he just moved over and let Lando straight past. And I just don't think there's any more to it. I think GP, he's certainly wound up a lot of people by saying that, isn't he? They're all thinking there's some sort of conspiracy going on. But yeah, it was very odd that. To me, it was, he made a mistake. The tyres are going off. Lando was much quicker at the time. And that was it. End of story. What we don't want in Formula One is the whole Nicholas Latifi thing. And I know it started a little bit now with the Kimi thing, which is ludicrous. And it's all a part of, in my opinion, it's all related to this thing about it's okay to boo on the podium. One thing leads to another. And you get all this polarization of fan devotion. And there is a moment, I think, when all of us, regardless of who we support or want to win a race, should celebrate everybody and their ability to be Grand Prix drivers and everybody who puts together the Formula One show the way they do. And there is a moment when you can be very pro a driver, but if he loses, you still have to applaud the guy in the center of the podium, in my opinion. And it's the same as that business of, when a driver crosses the line, even if he's last, I want to see the team out there cheering him across the line. Jez James, do you think Bernie is correct when he says it's time for Lewis to retire from Formula One? No, I don't, because we don't know what the new Ferrari will be like in 26. And if it's a great car, for sure Lewis still has the talent, the ability, the motivation and the drive to win with that car. Now, if the Ferrari is terrible in 26 and he has another bad year and Charles is just getting more from the car right on the edge and just getting into Q3 sometimes and Lewis is struggling around in Q1, Q2, answer yes. But until we know where Ferrari are in 26, I think it would be, having made the move and Ferrari have put all the money into Lewis, I think it would be, if his contract is absolutely cast iron, I don't see why he would stop before knowing what the car is like. That'd be my opinion. If it's a bad car, I would not expect Lewis to be anywhere near Charles. If it's a good car, a very, very good car, I would expect him to be pretty near Charles and, win races in the car. Not beat Charles over a year, no way, but have the odd win or two. So the damage is done. The whole thing was wrong from day one, in my opinion, for Ferrari to get rid of Carlos Sainz and to hire Lewis and not to get Adrian Newey. I think all of those things were wrong, but it is what it is now, as we love to say. And having got there, and 26 being such a question mark, it would be the wrong time. Unless Bernie knows what we don't know, which is exactly how the Ferrari is going to be in 2026, and he already knows that it's going to be a terrible car, which I doubt. I doubt that he knows that is, then that's a different matter. But I doubt he does know that. Why would he know that? Ferrari don't even know what their car is going to be like. OYRSLYNG. I'm glad I actually spelled that out, but hi there. Thanks for your question. Hi, Peter. Could you give your opinion on how Oscar managed to find such a blistering race pace this weekend? Lines, touch and feel. How can a driver be so different between high and low grip tracks? Well, I think, by the law of averages, he was eventually going to sort of get into sync with everything, and he was going to find a sweet spot that he enjoyed and get the best from what is a very good car. So, and he's been out of sync with that sweet spot for several races now, basically since Singapore. So that one, law of averages, which is a bit of a sort of an abstract magic thing to say, black magic thing to say. I think more significantly, there were 4 or 5 fast corners. I'm not talking high grip, low grip here. I'm talking high speed corners that needed a lot of commitment. And I think that's where Oscar was good around Qatar. He was very good on the fast corners, just committing the car. And he's always been good in that area anyway. I mean, that is Oscar. And Lando was more susceptible to error on those fast corners. He would get it slightly wrong on entry, and he'd run a little bit wide, touch a curb, damage the floor a little bit, come into the pits as in practice, have to spend time repairing things, go out. Oscar was very, very good on those fast corners. And there's not many circuits out there with so many high-speed corners. Silverstone would be another place that springs to mind. Spa, obviously. So I think it was the nature of the circuit. And that's why when I was talking to Cameron, I was saying, well, how is he going to go at Abu Dhabi? And of course, there are more slow corner sections at Abu Dhabi, but there are a couple of places where he could be pretty good. And I think it's those reasonably medium speed corners in probably back end of Sector 2 at Abu Dhabi, and obviously the S's after the start, which I think are flat, but nonetheless, even if they're flat, you can get a car to be flatter to the road than if you're moving it around a little bit more. And Lando looked to be pitching the car more than normal for me in Qatar to get around the sort of issues that he'd been having. So I think it was more just to do with he's very good on commitment to high-speed corners, Oscar Piastri. Really good. And he just drives fast corners very well. All this high grip, low grip stuff. Of course it's high grip because they've got a lot of downforce on a fast corner. So you could classify it in that way. But I prefer to classify it that he just has a very good eye for a fast corner. And I suspect that the more you have barriers on the outside and the less the runoff area on those fast corners, the bigger Oscar's advantage over Lando would be. Not that we have many fast corners or any fast corners without runoff area these days. But if we did, I think Oscar would be going off into another planet if he did that, if you had those corners. Fassi94 Enter. Hi, Peter. Do you think we are going to see a more innovative level of attack and defence from drivers with the removal of DRS and introduction of active aero and electric boost button? Will this open up strategic options during the race for drivers and teams? Well, I think that's why they're doing it, to open up more strategic options. Bottom line, have more overtaking, more place changing, let's put it that way. Because changing positions is not the same as an overtake, in my view. And I think defence will become even less of an art, in the same way that lapping a back marker is now a non-existent art, or changing gear with a a foot clutch and a hand is a non-existent art today. I think defence will become a non-existent art, which is a great shame, because I think defence is one of the great things about racing, and I love watching defence as much as I get excited watching attack. But yeah, I think there'll probably be more. I think in the first half of the year, there'll probably be more place changings, just because everybody keeps getting it wrong, and somebody benefits from somebody else's mistake. It's going to be more than that. It's going to be, oh wow, we had 97 place changes in this last race. It's the greatest Formula One ever, but 96 of them were all due to somebody getting it wrong, and somebody just breezing past, not a real overtake. And I fear that the TV coverage will just be jumping from one overtake to another with no understanding of why they're actually happening, these overtakes. That's my fear. So bring on the channel where we can just watch the onboards and just kind of get a feel for one driver doing what he's doing during the race. But I think there'll be lots of argy-bargy in terms of trying to work out how to use the strategy and the active arrow and the push to pass and the harvesting and all that rubbish. Not my scene. I just love motor racing, start to finish, lovely, fuel burning V10 engine making lots of noise, and reliable, close racing. Everybody knows what's going on, and no DRS. Tows, what it's all about, get a really good tow, and just go motor racing and enjoy it. They're complicating it so much now. I mean, I think it's going to be really difficult to understand exactly what's going on. I just don't see why they do that. It was complicated enough going to hybrid engines, let alone all this other stuff now. Anyway, Drew, what do you think about Helmut saying Kimi let Lando past? Kimi from Mercedes, Red Bull excuse, when is them not having a second driver to back up Max? That's the real problem. Yuki sucks, Kimi not the issue. Yeah, well, I mean, I can imagine Helmut Marko saying that. Oh, he let him pass. Yeah, because that's what Helmut would say, isn't it? But I don't think he did, and I don't think Max thinks he did, and I don't think Red Bull have suffered from having Yuki in the other car. I think it wouldn't have made any difference who that had in the other car. Unless it was a super quick driver who might have annoyed Max and then detracted from what Max wanted to do with the car. And the more I think about it, the more I think that the issues and the way and I'm going back to a previous question now, the resolving an issue over a weekend, I think it does actually help having a guy just like Max as the only driver that they listen to. Because there are occasions when drivers start to imagine issues and problems that aren't real. They're real, but they're not as real as the driver thinks they are. I'm not saying Max is guilty of that, but if you had two quick drivers going in opposite directions, it would be slightly more difficult for the engineers to know exactly what to fix. So I'm kind of revising now what I said, and I think actually you're right. I think because Max is the only guy there, and when he says he's got bouncing, or when he says he's got a strange bump in the car whenever he uses a downshift, or if the upshifts are slow, they immediately respond to that because they know that's the fact. That is the case. And you have drivers who complain about things that maybe other drivers will just fix themselves. And I'm not saying this is the case, but a good example right now, and I was talking about this with Mark Slade at the end of our chat, was the steering problem that George Russell has been talking about, which first showed up. We first heard him talking about it in Vegas. The steering feels much stiffer than it should. And then there was talk about it, how it felt from left to right-handers, not really a response from George. And then he said again in Qatar that there was a steering problem on the car. This is in practice or qualifying, I think. And then he did say, yeah, and it feels different from left to right. And Mark was saying, quite often drivers, he said that's not unusual actually. And quite often drivers, if they've had an issue, then are very sensitive to that issue reappearing on the car, even if it's not really an issue, and it's just something that all cars have at some point when the tyres are not fully hot or whatever. And so there's a lot to be said about a driver just working through a problem rather than two drivers throwing lots of information about an issue that they're worried about, because that's when it does get confusing. And indeed, Mark went on to talk about an episode with David Coulthard at Monaco one year when his footwell, the pedal setup was changed overnight for some reason, and they incorrectly reset the throttle movement for him in the McLaren, And this was at Monaco, and he went out and he couldn't believe that the throttle was basically just an on-off switch. He'd suddenly lost all his movement in the throttle. And yeah, he was completely shaken by this and discombobulated and immediately told the team. But then this is the point. After 4 or 5 laps, DC adapted to it, and he couldn't believe that he could then drive the car virtually the same way with this ridiculously small throttle movement, but he was adapting to it straight away. That's a good point, isn't it? That drivers do adapt very quickly. Yeah, you can, in the old days, you could miss a gear, lose a gear, and then you could still win the race with no gear or no clutch. And now today, they adapt. You know, maybe Max often has weird steering, but he never complains about it because he knows that if he just lives with it for a bit and just drives around it, it'll disappear, or it'll disappear in his mind or his feel. And so, yeah, there's a lot to be said about working with just one driver and working on the problems he's exposing. But of course, it's a huge advantage if that driver is Max Verstappen, because you know the problems he's exposing are real. There's nothing fictitious about him. And that's the beauty of having a wonderfully talented, great driver, which Ferrari have in Leclerc, but they're misusing him because they've got a lot of Lewis in there who's probably confusing the inputs. That's exactly my point. I've always said, if you've got Charles, you don't need Lewis. I think Carlos Sainz was a really good foil for Charles in that respect. And if you've got George Russell, you don't put Lewis alongside him. You put Kimi Antonelli. So Mercedes looking pretty good. If you've got Lewis, you don't put George alongside him. You have Valtteri Bottas alongside him. And so it goes on. That's why I always make that point. Nayan Rathan. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing well. I am doing very well. Thank you very much. Yeah, great. And he says, love your work and analysis of the race. Just a silly question. Do you have a bias towards Max because you believe he's the best driver on the current grid? Well, I believe he's the best driver and therefore the most deserving world champion this year because he's still in the running at the end of the series. Does that add up to bias? I don't know. If you think that you should base your respect for a driver on his nationality, how he behaves out of the car, what he's like as a human being out of the car, rather than how he actually drives the car, then I suppose you could say I might be accused by, McLaren fans for being biased. But I don't base my assessment of drivers on any of that stuff. I only base it on how they drive. That's why I don't actually watch what they do on social media, and I don't really watch all the stuff before the start of a race, and I don't listen to any of the preamble. I just watch what they do in the car and listen to what they're doing in the car. And I just watch and see and think, wow, this guy's really good, So, I mean, if you take Isaac Hadjar as a good example, I don't actually know Isaac Hadjar. I've never spoken to him. I've never met him. But I love the way he drives, and I quite respect that he's managed by a friend of mine who also manages Pierre Gasly. And I think, wow, he's got good judgment in that case because he knows what he's doing in terms of out of the car too. So all of a sudden, my respect for Isaac Hadjar goes up. Now, does that make me an Isaac Hadjar fan at the expense of some other rookie? Not really. I mean, I've got the same respect for Oliver Behrman and how he operates as well. So I don't know. This whole thing of bias, I don't really understand it. For me, it's to do with how good they are and what job they do in the race car, which is what it's all about. So, yeah, there you go. It doesn't really answer the question, but thanks for asking it anyway. WCR Movies. Hi, Peter. Going to Abu Dhabi. I'd like to say thank you for your insight all year on the incredible season. Hope you get to savor the final race and that the weather is lovely there. Well, I'm sure you guys will have a wonderful time and you will not have a problem with the weather, and I hope you savor the place too. I was actually the host of the opening of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix many years ago, before they actually built the circuit. It was an event held on the Corniche, and Fernando was there with a Renault doing runs up and down, and I was a sort of host compare thing of the whole deal. And yeah, and I loved it there, and it's, look what it is now. You'll have a great time and enjoy yourself. The only thing I'd say is that the support paddock is miles away from the Formula One paddock, which I think is very unfair because all those guys pay a fortune to race in Formula 3 and Formula 2, and the least that can happen is that they're very near the Formula One paddock and they can come in and be seen and we can get to know them all. And That's a shame, but nonetheless, the support paddock is still a great paddock as well in Abu Dhabi, in terms of atmosphere and people. Again, from WCR Movies, just to add, in the very possible situation Piastri is asked to let Norris through for the championship, do you think it would be a great and refreshing bit of modern Collins-esque sportsmanship? Yeah, I do. And I think he will. I mean, if he's got absolutely no chance of being world champion himself, Oscar will comply with team orders and give the championship to Lando. I don't think he would, for the sake of it, stop Lando winning and therefore allow Max to win it. I'm not sure what the permutations on track would have to be in order for that to happen. But anyway, because if Max really has to win it doesn't he, to be world champion, and then Lando not to score well. But so long as he's in front of, if say Lando's out of the race from lap 1 or lap 10 or whatever, all Max has to do is finish in front of Piastri, right? So there's no situation where Piastri would do anything, because until the race is over, Max could stop as well. But yeah, I think if there is a situation where there is absolutely no chance of Oscar winning it, the championship that is, then I think he would. And I think he would. I don't know. I think he would. I don't think he'd think too much about it. He'd just think, oh, yeah, okay. Team orders, yeah, all right. And then he'd be, obviously, they'd love him for it. And he would be massively in the debt. But I don't think that's the reason he would do that. I think he would just do it because what would be the point of not doing it, really? I mean, I know he was upset about Singapore, but he has had a great race car. McLaren have allowed him to win a lot of Grand Prix. So, you know, I think he would do it, but he wouldn't do it if he was still in the running for the championship. And that's, of course, what made the Peter Collins thing, so the Collins-esque thing, as you call it, so remarkable, that at that point Peter Collins could have won the championship, and yet he gave up his car to Fangio in the same team in order to let Fangio win it. And when asked why, he said because it would have been unthinkable for any Ferrari driver other than Fangio to win the world championship this year, 1956. And that was the ultimate sporting gesture, wasn't it? He just total respect for his team leader, and he's the great Juan Manuel Fangio, who at that point had only won 3 championships, and this became his 4th. And then he went on to win it with Maserati in '57. So, yeah, it wouldn't be equal to that, because I don't believe Oscar would in any way forsake a chance of winning the championship in order to let Lando win it. I don't think he would do that. And I don't think he'd get any flack from McLaren either for not doing that if he still had a chance to win the championship. Jay's 8964. Hi, Peter. Thanks for an excellent analysis. In Vegas, you think McLaren were using speed limiter throughout high-speed corners to avoid porpoising. They state increased porpoising result of running car too high. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the speed limiter in the race. It was the power. You can do it through the power harvesting, and you do it that way. You set it that way. You can use a speed limiter in practice, I think. But yeah, they were limiting the speed through high-speed corners, as indeed was Max. And they're all doing it, I think, for tyre management, because there's no other explanation for why, with 3 or 4 laps to go, Will Joseph said to Lando, okay, we're okay now. You can take out the management. You can manage the car less. Why would he do that if it was the floor? He would be saying the opposite. And anyway, the floor damage, as we sort of concluded after that race, was pretty much, if it was done, would have been done quite early on when the car was on full tanks. So I think it was tyre management when they were doing all that stuff at the end of the race. And I don't think they had a real feel for what was going on with the plank. One day we'll know. One day I'll go down to Woking and have lunch with one of my mates there and find out what happened. A year or 2 from now, when nobody cares anymore. That's the only time to get information like that, I think. Jay's again, 8964. Peter, have you read Our Daily Cars at Speed? Yeah, I have. I've got it. Cruel sport, but still good read. Thanks for recommending Jim Clark at the wheel. Checkered year. Unfair advantage. Jenks racing driver. Enjoyed them. Well, yeah, there's lots there that I mean, you've really got the whole spectrum there. Jim Clark at the wheel. Checkered year. Ted Simon. Unfair advantage. Mark Donoghue. Jenks the racing driver. Yeah. Paul Frere. technique of motor racing. Maybe you could throw in there. I've got obviously the Robert Daly book and also Cruel Sport. Both of them excellent. More pictorial, really, than anything else. I think I was, when I got them, I was a bit slightly disappointed with them because there's too much emphasis on danger, and I'd sort of grown up thinking that you don't talk about the danger and the safety, but I should revisit them, I think. I'm just looking across because I've got lots of books over here, other things that maybe I should be recommending for reading. I mean, there's obviously the Steve Waugh Ashes Cricket Diaries, which are compelling reading for anybody. Then there's the complete set of Winston Churchill's World War II, but moving swiftly onwards to something to do with motor racing. I think William Court's Volume 1, The Power and Glory, is definitely compulsive reading for everybody, going back to Darac's of 1903. And I think the book on, what was it called? I can't remember. It's the 1.5 litre formula, every Formula One race results. And it was just wonderfully done, so detailed. Every car, every race that you can have there. I'll have to look that one up because I can't actually see it here, but it's a great book as well. Anyway, yeah, good. And where we go? Are we go yet? Yeah, I think you're talking about, this is when Peter is late. Was I late? I don't think so, a couple of minutes late. I was just trying to make sure that the thing was working before I came on. Samandragon, hi Peter, thank you for all the streams this year. I'm very much looking forward to 26. Many thanks again. Well, thank you for supporting the channel with these streams, because they work because of all these questions and things. And you all are pretty good now at prodding my brain and into certain directions and hopefully recalling lots of little incidents that I can regale you with. So we'll see. KK Poon, hello from Hong Kong. Very sad, and condolences to everybody who lost loved ones in that terrible fire in Hong Kong. But anyway, we'll love your analysis for this wonderful race to conclude this year. Yeah, well, I'll do my best on this occasion of the last round of the 2025 World Championship. But guess what? We're going to be going pretty quickly into 26, aren't we? Because we'll have all the new car launches pretty soon. And then, of course, the season will be upon us before we can even take a rest. And in between, Jack's got a tournament. My son's got a golf tournament this weekend, which I'm going to try and attend as well. Plus another one the weekend after. So it's never ending in the Windsor household at the moment in terms of events and competition and racing. Well, competition anyway. Next one, Rao 5160. How was Jolyon Palmer as a driver? Short corner, or why did he completely quit racing after Formula One? Was he not a racer? I always saw him pretty much like his dad, Jonathan, who was quick, very quick. Sort of, if I had to compare Jonathan Palmer with anyone today, I would say certainly more polished and less incident mistake prone as, say, Liam Lawson, and as I would say he's Alex Albon sort of area, I would say. Quite wide entries, and both he and Jolyon, but pretty nice touch, pretty supple, Alex Albon. But yeah, I would say that sort of level. He put somebody like Sainz next to them and they would have been struggling, but yeah, Albonish level, both of them, pretty similar. I'm not sure Jolyon was as good as Jonathan, actually. I think Jonathan was pretty good. A little bit too intelligent, probably, and a little bit too articulate to be a racing driver. Confused engineers sometimes, I think. And I shouldn't tell this story, but I will. He once, before he actually drove a Williams Formula One car, he did race one at the Brands Hatch in the British Grand Prix. Before he drove that car, he did quite a lot of testing for Williams, and Patrick liked him. They got on pretty well. On one occasion, he stayed at Frank's house. I'm not sure which one it was. It was probably the Goring one, I think. And he stayed overnight. And Ginny, was looking after him because Frank was always, doing his racing thing and anyway, looking after him in terms of dinner and making sure he knew where his bedroom was and all the rest of it. I remember chatting to Ginny a week or so later. We talked about Jonathan. And I said, Jonathan's really quick. She said, oh yeah, but he'll never be a real Formula One star. I said, why is that, Ginny? Why do you say that? You can't say that. He said, oh, well, he made his bed. I've never known a Formula One driver who makes his own bed. And I thought, well, yeah, she's probably got a point there. Poor Jonathan. Oh, well, there we go. All you can do is have a laugh. Keep the sense of humour, I think. Hi, Peter. This is another super chat. Thank you very much indeed. This is from No Time. Wow, very nice super chat. Thank you. Hi, Peter. The car goes faster on low tanks and generates more downforce, so it might actually have more plank wear on low fuel. Look at the Ferrari having more tyre pressure on later stints to raise the car. Yeah, well, I mean, you may be right. I would always bow to what a race engineer tells me, and they all say, if you're running to the point where the plank is going to be illegal at the end of the race, the damage will be done on full tanks early on. So yeah, Ferrari may play around with tyre pressures. I'm sure a lot of them do, but to mitigate it once they know where they're at. But the damage is done on heavy fuel when the car is heavy and it's bottoming out, and it's bottoming out on bumps, and that's what's going on. It's not anything else. So I think, yeah, I mean, what you say is quite logical, but then equally what race engineers say is quite logical. And at the end, I think we all have to bow down to race engineers because they know what they're talking about, don't they? Not that you don't, but they do. Marco Tiberini. Hi, Peter. You know what would be cool? A joint episode with Giorgio Teruzzi. He has a fun podcast on Formula One in Italian, and I think it would be interesting to see you talking to him, with him. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll write his name down now. Giorgio... I thought you were going to say Ascanelli there. He's another good old mate of mine. Used to work with him at Ferrari, actually. Giorgio Teruzzi. Okay, good. I'll give that a go. Have a look at it. Thank you very much. Jays again. Peter, Max has won as many races as Norris and Piastri. Is it too much emphasis put on Max's excellent, consistent driving, but not enough on Red Bull car team strength in today's Netflix era media? Well, I take your word for what is going on in the Netflix era media because I don't watch it, but if anybody is not giving Red Bull a lot of credit for the way they turn the car around with the floor and other upgrades from Monza onwards, then they don't know what they're watching in Formula One. Obviously, Max has played a massive role in that as well, in terms of the direction they're going technically, plus getting the best from the car in difficult situations, plus staying with them when they're in trouble, plus living with the issues when they're there, like bouncing and doing a good job nonetheless. So it's all a combination, but I don't think any of it would be happening unless Red Bull was as good as they are as a race team, or Max as good as he is as a racing driver. And all of it adds up, and it's a great combination. And it's, in many ways, you know, what we're seeing now is vindication, again, of Dennis Jenkinson's and Stirling Moss's opinion that the World Championship is actually not a good thing, and that it's better to take every race in its own right and win as many races as you possibly can. And that is what motor racing is all about. And imagine if we didn't have a World Championship and now they'd all won the same number of races. It'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? And because in a way, if Lando wins the championship now, it will kind of detract a little bit from Max's season and what he's achieved. And if Max wins the championship, it'll kind of detract a little bit from what the great days Lando's had and Oscar's had. And it's sad that the championship does that. I would prefer there to be no championship, and just to be saying now, look at this, they've all won the same number of races. Isn't it amazing? It's a good job we don't have a World Championship, because it would be unfair for whoever won it, or whoever didn't win it, more to the point. And so the last race would just be a race to win. Fastest guy wins it from the pole. Jenkinson and Moss, not only did you win the 55 Mille Miglia, but you had it absolutely right when it came down to the championship and what it was all about. And do we ever think of Stirling Moss in lesser terms because he was never world champion? I don't. I still think of him as one of the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time, and certainly the greatest of his era. And what his era was is debatable, you know, back end of Fangio, beginning of Jim Clark. But nonetheless, Moss was absolutely brilliant. And he was never world champion. So always remember that. KK Poon again from Hong Kong. Will a podium consist of Max, Hamilton and Tsunoda? The best ending for this year. Max, Hamilton and Tsunoda. What would that mean? Well, that would mean... I don't know what that would mean. That would mean everybody else has fallen out, would it? I don't know. And Max is world champion. No, it shouldn't be too nasty about Lewis and Tsunoda, I suppose. I mean, Yuki's really blown it, hasn't he? He got this opportunity, because Liam Lawson blew it, to go to the A-team and to do a pretty good job and be the sort of next Sergio Perez for the next 5 years. He's completely blown it, not only by being slow, but also whinging. And now he's going where? IndyCar or something. Ridiculous. If I was Yuki now, I wouldn't go to IndyCar. I don't think his driving lends itself to IndyCar in the way that it did for Takuma Sato and does for Takuma Sato. And if I was Yuki now, I would retire and manage Cali Rovan Perez Japanese Super Formula Championship and become Cali's right-hand guide in Japan. Be a lot of fun. Because I don't think his career is going to go much further now, to be honest. And so, he's blown it completely. And he had all that Red Bull money spent on him all these years. It's all for naught, really. How many more Japanese people have bought Red Bull because of Yuki? Probably a few. I wouldn't have thought that many. More because of Max, I would have thought, in Japan. They're pretty perceptive in Japan, aren't they, in terms of their motorsport, understanding who's good, who's not. Iron Mike Tyson. This is from, whoa, I hope it's not the real one. If it is, hey, yeah, I didn't do anything. Without Schumacher-like setup, will Ferrari ever win? Well, it's a good point. I don't think they will, no. I think, that's why I've always said for the last couple of years, the thing that Ferrari needed most was Adrian Newey, who would have brought a Michael Schumacher, Ross Brawn type setup with him. And that's how Ferrari would be now. If Adrian had joined Ferrari back end of 2024, Ferrari today would be very different in terms of its structure on the pit wall, the way the car's designed, the way it's put together, be completely different. But it would be good. And the car, for sure, would be good in 26. And then he could have turned it all around. But they chose not to do that. A, because they wanted to spend the money on Lewis rather than Adrian, which I think is a mistake. And B, because they didn't want to lose their jobs, I think. As simple as that. It was too difficult for them to think of Adrian Newey. Probably from an Italian union point of view, it was a nightmare too, I guess. But, you don't let something like that stand in your way, do you? Get on and solve the problems. Spend the money. BNNT, hi Peter, really appreciate your weekend analysis and these live streams. Thank you very much. Can you recall any other time when a team was so far ahead in the constructors' points against such tight drivers' championship? Well, 86, I think, right? Mansell, PK, very tight in the drivers, easy win in the constructors. Pretty sure that would have been the case. What about 07 with Lewis and Fernando? And they managed to lose the drivers to Kimi. And I think, to have two drivers in the same team like this, I would say 86 is the parallel. And, look at the Max Verstappen of 86. Won the Drivers' Championship. Interesting. Gay 10B, Canada, howdy, wow. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, well, I love Canada. One of my favourite countries. I've got many friends in Canada, and I've got a lot of motor racing love of Canada. And, yeah, Canada. Let's hear it for Canada. Actually, there's another good book there, which I think about, is the biography of Ken Reed, the downhill racer. Really good biography. Enjoyed that one a lot. Talks well about Steve Podborski as well, another of the crazy Canucks. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. In your opinion, at this point, won't McLaren have an easier winter if Max ends up winning it instead of one of their drivers due to the mess of the papaya rules? Yeah, I do, actually. It's a good point. I think they will have an easier winter. And I think this is where Zak will be very good. If they don't win the Drivers' Championship in Abu Dhabi, I think Zak will be a very calming influence on the team of how well they've done, and winning the Constructors' Championship was really what it was all about, and that's what brings the money in for the future, and everybody's jobs are secure for the next 100 years, and isn't it wonderful, and we're going to fight now to win next year. And I think he'll do a very good job of that. And if it's a mess and one of them wins it in a way that really annoys the other, then it'll be a difficult winter. Very difficult winter. You're right. You're making a good point. I mean, a lot of people are saying and thinking logically that Lando will fly in Abu Dhabi and disappear and win the race easily, and thus the championship. But it's hard to imagine how, after a great race weekend of the type Oscar Piastri had in Qatar, that he's just going to suddenly go off the boil again and not be there at the most important race of his life. So if he is there, and he is really quick, that could be the undoing of McLaren. You know, those two, if they're right there battling for the pole, that's when mistakes and errors are going to occur in setup, in terms of driver errors, and certainly in terms of strategy. Simad Dragon has got 2 100s up there. I think that's a good thing. Thank you very much. Okan Stas, good morning from New York. Peter, just curious, what's your favourite James Hunt story? Well, first of all, I love New York, so thank you very much and welcome to you. Favourite James Hunt story was, well, it's not a story really, it was just an incident which I happened to be a part of in 76 at the Canadian Grand Prix, when it was quite a big race, that one, for him, because that was the race in which it was announced that Niki Lauda got his points back at the British Grand Prix. And bearing in mind, Niki and James were both sponsored by Marlboro, personal sponsors in case of Niki, and John Hogan was a mate to both of them. It was a difficult thing. They were both staying in the Holiday Inn, and John had a difficult job keeping the peace between the two of them. Nonetheless, James kept his character and kept his aplomb. He just remained James Hunt, even though he was burning inside with anger that this had happened. And James had lost his points. That was it. He'd lost his points in Brands Hatch. He'd lost his points. And so he knew now that the hill he had to climb was much steeper. And he wasn't really talking to Niki in the way he normally does. But he was super quick at Mosport Park, where the Canadian Grand Prix was being held that year. Very, very quick in the McLaren M23. And about 20 minutes before the start, they pulled up, all the mechanics were getting the cars ready in the pit area, in the little garages thing, and then they'd push them out onto the pit apron and then onto the grid, and they'd do their, probably do one formation lap. And James was, I don't know, I was sitting down on a grass bank anyway to get to the point. I was sitting down on a grass bank at the end of the pit lane, leaning against the Armco barrier, just making some notes. And James wandered up in his race overalls and sat down next to me, which I thought, wow, great. And I started talking to James about the Brands thing, and then Mosport and what he thought about it and how the car was going. We had a really good conversation. This is before, it was about 20 minutes before the start of the race. And as we were talking, the noise of the engines in the pit lane started to get louder, and the garage and everything. And suddenly he hears, wow, wow, wow. And suddenly James said to me, gosh, I must get my man to start my engine, and walked off. And I just thought the phraseology of my man to start my engine, nothing was closer to a Spitfire pilot about to get into his Spitfire in 1940 and go off and defend over London. And that was James Hunt. He was very, very English private school, public school as they're called in England. And that's how he saw it, my man and my engine, get it started. And he went out and won the race, as you probably remember. So that was my James. That's how I fondly remember James. I suppose also, all these little idiosyncrasies about, I've shown some pictures, I think, on this live stream once of a couple of golf pro-ams we did up in Scotland. I was basically there with Nigel, but James was the other really good golfer amongst the Grand Prix drivers. And usually it was Lee Trevino and usually it was Seve Ballesteros, and usually it was Peter Allis, and it was a great combination for dinners and all the rest of it. And I remember one year James driving up in his, fuel-guzzling Mercedes 600 up from London to Scotland with Oscar, his Alsatian dog. And I remember chatting to him when he eventually got up there and he was getting into the hotel. I think it was Turnberry. And he said, "Oh, it's so good to be at a dog-friendly hotel. I mean, I stayed in one last night in York. They said it was dog-friendly, and Oscar had to sleep outside, and I had to take the food outside to him, and it was no problem with that, but it was cold by the time I got there because the weather was terrible." And he was going on and on about how he had to feed poor Oscar outside, and it was the big bane of his life. And Oscar literally would sit next to him in the Merc on the passenger seat as he's driving up. And then when he lost all his money at the end, when all his wives sued him for money that he didn't have anyway, he had no compunction about driving around in an Austin A35 van because it was a good, reliable English van. That was James Hunt. Wonderful guy. I really miss him. Really miss him. I mean, it's such a shame that we don't have him around now. He would be so brilliant on TV now, being the commentator of this situation we're in now. He'd be such a Max fan, and he'd be so anti-Lando and Oscar. Well, anti-Lando for sure. I'm not sure about Oscar. He'd probably quite like Oscar, I think, but he would be 100% behind Max, 100%. Don't forget, James Hunt is the guy who got his chance right at the end of 1975, when Emerson decided to leave McLaren and do his own thing, Kopasuka. And McLaren wanted to get Ickx, and he couldn't do it. So they hired James Hunt to take Emerson's place at McLaren. Never driven the car before. Goes to Interlagos, the old Interlagos. Puts the car on the pole in his first race for McLaren. Brilliant. Connor Clark says, very hard to see how Lando doesn't win the championship now. Yeah, I think you're right. If he doesn't win now, something cataclysmically wrong will have taken place, because he's in a great car, he's ahead on points, and he's already won once at Abu Dhabi, knows how to win there, knows the track, knows everything. So all he needs to do is just drive around and win the race. Easy, simple. Yeah, right. Let's wait and see what happens. Sasa and Robin, Oscar for sure, more than Norris. And this is to do with who do you favour to win, who's the most deserving driver. Oscar for sure. So Saman Dragon says, agreed. If Lando wins it, it will feel empty to many. Well, yeah, I'm sure it will. Because the thing is, Lando won't care about that. He only cares about the championship. I think everybody should remember Stirling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson and how the championship's irrelevant. It's how many races you win. Retro Gamer, exciting weekend ahead. 3 potential driver championship winners. Max deserves it most, Piastri, then Lando. Yeah, everybody seems agreed on that. All worthy winners, hopefully not next season. Hopefully next season is even closer. Yeah, well, I'm sure it may be, because there may be so many ridiculous things going wrong with these cars that it may be maybe 9 drivers in the running going into the last round. Who knows? Alvaz 04, they're putting Oscar, Lando and Max in the press conference together as they did with Lewis and Max in 21. Another chance for Max to get into their heads. Yeah. He's pretty good, isn't he? Max really doesn't have to say very much at all in this situation to get into their heads, I think. Just stay silent, let them do the talking and go out. That would be a cool way to handle it, I think. Let Lando and Oscar go at one another. But yeah. Connor Clark again. What do you think of Leo Fornaroli taking a development driver role at McLaren? Yeah, I was talking about that earlier in the stream in my monologue, I'm pleased, obviously, that McLaren have seen the light and given this guy a chance, which is more than any other team seems to have done in recent times anyway. And I think he's really good. I just hope he doesn't disappear without trace at McLaren and, end up in I don't know where, Formula E or IndyCar or somewhere, because he's really good. And he's got this raw edge, which I think is actually has been sharpened by not having a Formula One deal. I think it's worked in his favour, and it's a good thing. And it shows he's got lots of self-belief and character and doesn't need people around him, fawning around him. Quite what McLaren will do with him, there's not a great history there in terms of some drivers. If you look at, Alex Palou is a good example. I just hope that McLaren give him the right opportunity and it's not just lost. That's all. Easy to say that, sounds quite condescending, but I just think he's quite a special guy, a special driver, and I hope they're seriously thinking about Formula One for him before long. Skippy says, those 9 drop points from Verstappen crashing into Russell in Spain now look very crucial. Yeah. For me, that was more a strategy error of putting him in the wrong tyres at the restart. They should have left him out, given him track position, and he would have finished top 3 for sure. I don't know what they were thinking. That was a major strategy error by Red Bull, and you could say, well, they made up for it in Qatar. I don't think they did. I think they just did a normal call, and McLaren messed up in Qatar. But the strategy call that really cost Max points was Spain, and you see it as what happened after the poor strategy call. I see that as totally predictable, that Max would just see red and possibly crash out of the race or get penalties. It was pretty predictable that would happen because they made such a mess of the strategy. Having said all that, he was very lucky not to end up in the guardrail in a ball of mess with the way Charles Leclerc drove into him on the straight in Barcelona at the restart as well, when Max had that enormous moment, remember, on the cold tyres. Terrible. That's could well have, that's what it was, that strategy call on the tyres that I think is the big loss for Max this year. I think also maybe he could have had a slightly better, I don't know. I mean, Singapore, I was very critical of starting him on the softs. I don't think that was a good move either. But anyway, we'll see what happens in Abu Dhabi. It didn't really cost him in the end in Singapore probably, but I think Spain is the one that was costly. Not Max's driving afterwards, but the strategy there. The only Chris Welch, morning Peter. What's your thoughts on Lindblad to Racing Bulls? I thought Fornaroli earned a Formula One seat more than Lindblad. I much understand Lindblad, part of the Red Bull Academy. Yeah, I think this Lindblad's got this sort of a little bit of a Red Bull aura, cool aura about him, whereas Fornaroli's more of a sort of racing driver who isn't going to sit down and fawn over Helmut Marko. He's just going to do what he does, and he's got a massive self-belief to get this far without a deal. And whereas I think Lindblad has sort of become already a sort of template Red Bull driver, and it's up to him now how he goes. Is he quick? Is he not quick? We'll see how he gets on alongside Liam Lawson. I mean, at the end of the day, if he's going to be as good as Isaac Hadjar, he needs to be blowing Liam Lawson away pretty quickly within about 4 races. He needs to be there or thereabouts, quicker, or maybe a tenth slower here and there, and out racing him. That's what any really quick driver who's going to have a great future would be doing if Liam Lawson was their teammate, regardless of their experience. So we'll see how he gets on. Again, it's going to be quite a difficult year to judge drivers, new drivers, because there are going to be so many different variables on all the cars, with all the push to pass, the power harvesting, the energy storage, all the active DRS. The whole thing's going to be a mess, in my opinion, and it's quite difficult to judge sheer driving skill with all those other things going on. So in a way, it's not a bad year for a guy like Lindblad to be coming in, because there are so many things that you can disguise your driving with if you're not doing a good job. I'm not saying he won't, and maybe he is the next Ayrton Senna. I don't know. We'll wait and see. But I think he's played the role of being a young Formula One star very well with Red Bull, and they like the way he walks into a restaurant. A lot of it is that. And I guess Fornaroli for them is a bit too raw and a bit too much of a good racer, probably. Right, let's go to the top of the list here. So I got another super chat. Max 790, thank you for the super chat, says, Peter, rank Moss, Clark and Stewart, all legends. Wow, yeah, well, I wish you wouldn't ask me these questions. Rank, I could describe them. Rank them's another matter. Moss, ahead of his time, out of the car, and to some extent in the car, and the way he ran his life and the way he ran himself as a professional Formula One driver, way ahead of his time, and set the template really for all the money that the current Formula One drivers are earning. That was all basically started by Stirling Moss, and being the total pro, managed by Ken Gregory, and not just saying yes to any deal, making sure there was a proper quid pro quo, and that was Stirling. Very aware of his presentation, articulate, smooth, suave, a world traveller extraordinaire. And he made it because he was a talented driver, not because he had a lot of money behind him. And on the track, he was a short corner driver of incredible sensitivity and suppleness, and always had the car under his control. He was always manipulating the car rather than driving it on reflex, which is what a lot of the firebrands of the 50s did, but not Stirling. He was on top of the car, and that's why he was so consistent and so good. His accidents were usually caused by mechanical failure, and he drove a lot of Lotuses, so he had his fair exposure to that. And his last accident was in a Lotus, and so he was just abnormally great, Stirling Moss. And I think Fangio knew how good Stirling was in '55 when he was his teammate at Mercedes, and I think there was a lot of, as much as Stirling revered Fangio, I think Fangio had massive respect for Stirling as well. Jim Clark, similar story in a way, not so aware of being the professional racing driver out of the car, and a very shy and retiring personality, not wanting to impose himself on others, but just an unquenchable thirst for driving interesting racing cars at their limit, and driving it in a way very similar to Stirling Moss. Short corners, suppleness, incredible feel for what the car was about to do, and to preempt that with more inputs. Max Verstappen style, a loyalty, I think, to Colin Chapman at Lotus, even though the fragility of Lotus was an obvious thing for Jimmy throughout his career, but he remained loyal always to Colin, had a very, very close relationship with Colin. They had flying in common towards the end of their lives, and he never ever put himself above the mechanics or any of the shop floor staff at Lotus. He was the first to go out and get the tea, get the coffee, bring in the sandwiches if necessary, and nonetheless was super cool. He was the 60s. He was around with the Beatles. He was around with Gene Shrimpton, with David Bailey's rise as a photographer, and he was, if he needed to be, he could be Mr. Rat Pack and look absolutely cool as any dude on the planet if he put on his suit and his tie. And usually he wore a tie. He was unafraid to race any car anywhere, unless it was poorly prepared. There are a couple of occasions when he didn't drive a Lotus 19 in Canada one year because he didn't like the preparation. But in general, whether it was a Volstead USAC car at the back end of 67 or a Lotus 30 stroke Lotus 40 with horrendous handling, he would still get in and give it 100%. So Jim Clark was, nobody better. I'm not saying he was the best, but nobody better. And then Jackie Stewart, similar way of driving. All three of them short corner, if you wanted to define them that way. All three of them manipulation drivers, very, very supple, very, 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 very quick. It's easy to say that, but super fast, super competitive, and all with inputs perfectly in harmony with what the car was doing at that time at any given moment. I think Jackie obviously was more a different era, but he basically became the commercialized version of Stirling Moss in terms of the ultimate professional out of the car, and beyond that became the first driver to be really safety conscious, and so many of the safety facilities we have today for the cars, the drivers, and the circuits can be traced back to Jackie Stewart, and the safety we have. Really, every driver before he gets in a car today should be saying thanks to Jackie Stewart. I think Jackie was brave beyond belief in the way he stood up for his safety and how Formula One should change, and he led driver boycotts in a way that Stirling and Jimmy would never have done probably, but Jackie had no compunction in doing that. And he used to get people like Jochen Rindt and Jack Brabham to join him. Guys who were the ultimate racers would join Jackie in their boycotts and understand what Jackie meant, whether it was the poor mounting of Armco barriers, whether it was the danger of a circuit like the Nürburgring, whether it was track breaking up, whatever it was, Jackie would always have his finger on the button. And so, I think different in all three cases, very difficult to rank them, and I'm not going to rank them. I just described them, and that's it. Okay, there you go. Dirk2566, 100% agree with your Yuki comment. Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, it's not difficult really to say that, is it? Because it's just another wasted thing. I mean, he did a better job than Scott Speed, but what were Red Bull thinking? Was it really that important in terms of, excuse me, I'm just trying to get this foam padding, which I actually did nick from a team once. It is to do with driver thing. Got it down the back here. I'm going to have to get up and put it in properly. 1 second. There. Right. Now I won't have any more twitching and fidgeting. You can all... Right. And that's... Yuki just didn't take advantage of it because he didn't learn. He didn't continue to learn as a driver. He wasn't self-critical enough, and he listened too much to all the local fans or friends or whatever telling him how wonderful he was. And then when he didn't deliver, it had to be some other reason. It can't be his fault. And it's, such a shame. That was Yuki. Chester Marco, Yuki has already exceeded track limits at Abu Dhabi. LOL. Yeah, well, there you go. I could see Yuki at Toyota WEC. Yeah, maybe. And... lost without trace, as I say. Thanks for considering my question. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Thanks for asking it. Iron Mike Tyson. Very good. Dirks 2566. Would Horner, GP and Max make the difference at Ferrari? Well, I mean, Red Bull are quite capable of building a pretty bad car, as we've seen this year, despite the presence of GP and Max. So they need the basic car to be very good, and then that combination of GP and Max, which I think is as good a combination of a driver and a race engineer as I've seen this side of Mark Slade and Mika Hakkinen or David Brown and Nigel Mansell. And it's a great combination, but they need the fundamental car, and I don't think Christian would bring the fundamental car. It would be somebody like Adrian Newey, or maybe Rob Marshall these days as well. And if you had an Adrian there, or maybe a Rob Marshall at Ferrari with GP and Max, stand back. But then I don't think Charles Leclerc, if he's got the drive, would hang around. But I don't think Max would want that. Max would probably want Lewis in the other car, wouldn't he? I would imagine, in that situation. Cortenzin 2862. Can Max go to Ferrari and make their Schumacher era with good people around him? Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if Max has that Michael-like, Jackie Stewart-like ability to put together a team that he would take from one team to another. I think he's a bit more the sort of Sebastian Vettel, like Kimi Räikkönen, like, I can go there and do it on my own sort of thing. I don't think he thinks that. It's just that I just don't think he thinks like Michael in that sense. Michael said, I want Nigel Stepney, I want Johan Willem de Praat, I want Ross Brawn, I want Rory Byrne, bring them all in now, and then I'll make it happen. I'm not sure Max would do that, would he? Apart from anything else, maybe he wanted to keep Adrian Newey and he didn't. So if that's the case, so why didn't he keep Adrian there? So I just never see Max that way. I think he's more of a racing driver than he is a people manager. I may be wrong. He's got his own teams, and I'm sure he could run it. But same way Alan Prost could run sort of things. But when Prost had that opportunity, it failed, didn't it? When he did his own team. So another one from Iron Mike Tyson. Do you think Hamilton is greater than Schumacher? And can you review the Schumacher career? Do I think Hamilton is greater than Schumacher? No, I don't. But that's not to say they're both not great drivers. They are. Lewis Hamilton, at a time, was the best of his era and a great, great racing driver, as was Michael Schumacher. But I would hesitate to say that Michael was greater than Lewis, or vice versa. Different eras, different times. And I've often said, very difficult to compare different eras. And don't forget, in Michael's era, we had a tyre war, and Michael was on Bridgestones against the big competition on Michelin's, and with Bridgestone he effectively forged a unique relationship between Ferrari and Bridgestone, and that was the result. 5 world championships at Ferrari. Lewis in a different era, and spent a lot of his era in the Pirelli monopoly, and so it's a different thing. You know, he won races in different ways, and he's had different challenges, different issues. He's been in very, very good cars, very good teams, but he was beaten in one year by Nico Rosberg in an identical car. And although Nico Rosberg handed it to Michael at Mercedes, ironically, it wasn't for a championship, whereas it was at Mercedes, and the car was a championship-winning car. And so that never happened to Michael, except in '99. But then again, he did break his leg, so you can't really count that. So yeah, in some ways you could say Michael. In other ways, I think Lewis has been much cleaner on track. He's a much purer, more honest racing driver in terms of maneuvers and track craft. Lewis, I don't ever remember Lewis deliberately driving into somebody or holding somebody up deliberately or doing anything in the way Michael used to do it. And that's to Lewis's credit. And maybe on that side of the fence you could say, yeah, he is a greater driver than Michael Schumacher. Cleaner, more honest racing driver. Both of them very similar in terms of their style, what they're able to get a car to do, how they turn into a corner, all the things we talk about, the manipulation of the car. Both of them brilliant in the wet, brilliant in the semi-wet, brilliant when they make a small mistake and still nonetheless recover without losing a lot of time. I'm talking about Lewis up to 2021, by the way. I'm not talking about post-21 Lewis. So in that sense, that's why I always cop out of these things by saying I don't want to compare era with era any more than I would rank Moss, Clark and Stewart. Different eras, different times. Sport bike therapy. Has there ever been a time in Formula 1 history that a team won a Constructors' Championship but lost the drivers? Oh, yeah. Several times. And as we say, it happened in 86 for a start. And I think it happened in 07, didn't it? Went McLaren Constructors in 07 and lost the Drivers' Championship to Kimi. So, yeah, that's happened. Happened with did it happen with Nicky? No, it didn't. But in 77, the faster car was the Lotus. Nicky, Ferrari win the Constructors in 77. I need to check that. But there have been other examples. I think 73, when Jackie won the Drivers, I think Lotus won the Constructors' Championship. And so it goes on. So this is not the first time, if that happens, that we will have had a driver. If Max wins it, it's not the first time that a driver from the non-winning Constructors team has won the championship. KBNDZ. Peter, a question from me. You've often said that Max wouldn't want a George in the other car. Why? George is a long corner driver and isn't faster than Lando Carlos. Why would Max care about George? Oh, well, I think I don't agree with you that he isn't faster than Lando or Carlos. I think he's faster than both of those drivers. I think George is very, very fast. And that's why I don't think it would work having him alongside Max, because he's not a Lando or a Carlos. He's George Russell. He's very quick. So that's why. I just don't agree with your... he is a longer corner driver than Max, that's for sure. And he does have more faults in his driving than Max. He's a spikier driver, and he's got less of a sweet spot, less of a vernacular with which he can drive the car. But he's definitely quick. He's super quick, George. Really quick. And he's quick. I'd say he's definitely quicker than Lando Norris, definitely quicker than Carlos Sainz. So that's where, I disagree with you there. We all have our opinions. Wanda Lastasia. Alan Moffat, Canada. Yeah, Alan Moffat. Wow. Just mentioning that word out of the blue like that. Another of my great friends and heroes who was on Jim Clark's car when Jimmy won Indianapolis in 1965. Can you believe it? He was a gopher for Team Lotus in 1965, and he was helping out with the Lotus Cortina program in North America that year, and managed to do the deal of the century and bought 2 cars and all the assets, I think, at the end of 65 probably, and took them to Australia And I saw that car's first race in the hands of Alan Moffat, and it still had the olive green thing down the side, stripe down the side against the cream, and you could still see Team Lotus, but he'd painted over the Team Lotus and he'd called it Team Tricon, I think, Tricon. I don't know why it was on there, and that was Alan's first race in a Lotus Cortina in Australia. Canadian, lovely guy, super quick. And I was around in the late 60s, early 70s in Australia as a cub journalist for Australian Motoring News, writing race reports from Warwick Farm, Oran Park, Amaru Park, for this weekly newspaper, which was modelled on Motoring News in England. And I can still remember the smell of the paper and the print, and where we did it all in North Sydney. But what I didn't know at the time, and I was working for a guy called Tom Floyd, really, really nice guy, great journalist, who was the editor and publisher, I think, editor and publisher of Australian Motoring News. And thanks, Tom, for giving me that chance. What I didn't know at the time was that whole thing was owned by Neil Allen, one of the great great racing drivers of Australian motor racing history. Really quick in sports cars, Formula 5000, lovely guy as well. And he owned all this. He owned the building in which Australian Motoring News was published, and he owned Australian Motoring News. Anyway, I was working effectively for Neil Allen without knowing it. And so anyway, I used to write these race reports. And so I followed, getting back to the point, I followed Alan Moffat's career out of Lotus Cortinas into Mustangs and Coca-Cola sponsorship. And he was just, everything he did was really quick. And he was such a nice guy, such an easy guy to interview and chat to. Brilliant. Dirks 2566, don't you think Zak should resign when they fail? Well, I've been saying, we're all waiting to see what Zak's master plan is, and I'm still saying that in my cynical way, having predicted that there would be no master plan from day one and that they should have kept Daniel Ricciardo in the first place. But anyway, putting all that to one side, as I said earlier, I think if they do fail to win the Drivers' Championship, actually, I think Zak will do a really good job of telling the world and everybody who listens that McLaren have had a great year. They've won the Constructors' Championship. They took it all away. Now they're going to have an even better 26. And isn't it a wonderful winter now when they're going in hungry, learning from everything they've done, and they're going to come out of it bigger and better. And nobody better on the planet Earth to talk that sort of speech than Zak Brown. And I think he'll make it look as if it's been a wonderful year and McLaren should be so proud of not winning the Drivers' Championship. Something like that. I think that was the master plan, probably, that speech. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think Lando, you've got to say Lando's going to do it, because I'm a Rob Walker man. I've got to bet against my own horse, haven't I? In the hope that I'm wrong. Chester Marker, I think Lewis has earned the right to decide for himself as long as someone will hire him. Yeah, well, that's retirement, should Lewis retire. And you make another point there, as long as someone will hire him. And I don't think anyone will hire him, will they? If Lewis said tomorrow, I'm resigning from Ferrari, I can't stand it anymore, and I want to drive in 2026 for nothing. I don't want any money at all, just prize money and no retainer. Who would now employ him? Who would give him a drive? Would Sauber? I don't think Sauber would, because they're locked in. I think they quite like old Borticello and Bortoletta rather, and Borticello and Nico, and they got the whole Audi thing to do, and I don't think that would happen. Williams, maybe get rid of Albon and run Lewis at Williams, maybe. Would Haas run him? Assuming Haas keep Oliver, well, I suppose Behrman would go to Ferrari then and Lewis would end up in the Haas. I suppose that's what would happen, would it? I don't think Lewis would do that, would he? Not even Lewis would say, I'm going to, drive for Haas because I can't stand Ferrari anymore, and give the drive to Oliver Behrman. He wouldn't take the risk that the Ferrari was suddenly a good car and Behrman's blowing him away. So, no, I don't think anyone would hire him sadly, none of the top teams would, because they're well accounted for. And if you're Toto, you wouldn't think Lewis is going to be quicker than Kimi. And if you're Red Bull, you'd think, Isaac Hadjar will probably do Lewis. And if you're McLaren, maybe. Would you run Lewis instead of Oscar or Lando? I doubt it. So, yeah, it's kind of sad if you think of it that way. isn't it? And of course, that's if he drives for nothing. And he wouldn't. He'd want to drive for whatever, 50 minimum, I would have thought. Aaron Srivastav. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. How does one become a team manager as you were? Is it even possible? Well, in my case, I just got to know the people very well, and I knew Frank very well. And he asked me to be his sponsorship manager in back end of 84. No, first of all, in 78, he asked me to help him with his sponsors and help him find sponsors and manage the sponsors when I was still a journalist, which I did part-time when he was running Alan Jones and Clay Regazzoni in the 08 and 09. So I was very much a part of Williams then. And then I kept writing, and then he offered me a full-time job at the end of 84, running the whole sponsorship thing at Williams, which I did. And I have to say, I'm not boasting or anything, but exactly the same time, Ron Dennis offered me a job doing the same thing and pushed quite hard. And after that, I think my relationship with Ron never really was as good as it could have been, because I think he was kind of annoyed that I went to Williams. I'm not saying that he lost Peter Windsor. I think he just thought, what an idiot I am that I would choose Williams before him. I think that's what he thought. So I don't think I chose Williams because I just got on well with Frank, and I really liked Frank, and I knew we'd have a lot of fun together, which we did. And then I left Williams to do my own thing for a while, and then I went to Ferrari. And I guess I kind of proved there that I could put a team together and run it pretty well, which we did in 90. And then so Frank then asked me back as race team and test team manager in 91, end of 90 rather. So yeah, just with all being there, knowing them and having their respect, I guess. I don't know why Frank respected me. He was the clever guy, not me. But I guess also because I'd shown so much belief in Nigel Mansell and had been close friends with Nigel and telling everybody how good Nigel was since 1978. And then all of a sudden in 85, he was winning Grand Prix. I think people like Patrick probably thought, Windsor probably knows a bit more than we think. He was quite good with old Nigel, spotting him and bringing him into Formula One. So yeah, okay, Frank, yeah, give him a go. Probably that sort of thing. Not that Patrick spoke that way, of course. I think that probably had something to do with it. And also, I have to say with Frank, also I did the same thing with Carlos Reutemann, really. I persuaded Frank to take Carlos, and Frank never regretted that and loved Carlos. And I think that also built up the respect for him. And I did that by getting to know the drivers very well and seeing how much talent they had and helping them put deals together and raise money for their careers. And once you start doing that sort of thing, then you really start to get the respect of the team managers and team owners. I think that helps as well. There you go. There's another one. Donal Martin Plus. Mercedes won Constructors' Championship and Max won the Drivers. Yeah, okay. In 2021. There's a good example. Very good example. Thank you very much. I knew there was another one. Probably about 12 more that I've forgotten. Jules Clark. There are many circuits where George is quicker than Lando and Norris. Lando and Norris. I think you mean Lando and who are we talking about? Somebody else, Lando, Carlos. There you go. Yeah, I think he is. I think George is very quick. Simple as that. He's just very quick. Jochen Rindt quick. Noxio Lucas at Sport Bike Therapy, literally last year or 2021. Yeah, okay. So lots of examples. Therapy, dunno, that's right. How dumb of me this morning. Not enough coffee, forgot about that. Yeah, thank you, Peter, for all the analysis. This is from Bali. Enjoy your holidays. Looking forward to the 26th season. Dirks, I'm a team leader myself. At the moment, Zak and Stella taking the blame after Qatar. There is one motto: shit should never fall down. What is going to happen if McLaren fails winning the Drivers' Championship? Well, as I say, I think Zak will make a very good use of it and will persuade the world that McLaren done a wonderful job and both drivers have deserved to win the championship, but they failed at the end, not because they're not deserving, but because things didn't go quite as well as they should have. But nonetheless, we can celebrate their excellence by the Constructors' World Championship. And this is the championship that really matters because this is the one the stakeholders and the sponsors really talk about and think about, and this shows the true depth of brilliance at McLaren and excellence at McLaren, and it's the foundation of everything we are as a company, and it will take us forward into 26 as an even bigger and better and faster race team. Roll on 2026. Max, we're coming after you. Lando, Oscar, we owe you. Thank you. Isn't this wonderful? Isn't that what he'll say? Rah, rah, rah. Show Hammer, hello Mr. Windsor. About short corners, is it just getting the car straight early? And how can Senna and Russell be long corner drives if Senna was also short corners? Well, it's about not only getting the car straight early, it's about getting the car straighter for longer at the straight leading into the corner. So it's shortening the corner so the straights are longer at either end of the corner. And you do that by, well, we've explained a million times the importance of suppleness and of creating a platform for the car which is based on the harmony of the inputs of the driver with the with all the dynamic weights going on around the car, the hundreds of dynamic weights moving the car at any given moment. And if a driver is in perfect harmony with his inputs, he's manipulating the car to such a point where he can still be almost on full throttle, if not slightly lifting throttle when the road's starting to curve towards the corner, and then gradually within, that's relative terms, come out of the brakes against or increase brake pedal pressure against load, and then come out of the brakes at exactly the right moment, and then do a rotation point when the car is at its slowest, and then make sure at the rotation point you got a straight as exit as possible. And that's that's what Max, with his skill set, is able to do on quite a lot of corners. Now, you're saying, how can Senna and Russell be long corner drivers? Well, they are, because they don't possess all of the touch and feel and the harmony of inputs that Max Verstappen has. So when they try to do that, they get into understeer, or they lock on inside front, or the back end gets away from them. And so they go back to a slightly different turn-in approach where they're braking more in a straight line, and they're getting the power on maybe a little bit earlier, but they're loading up the rear. They're making the corner go on a little bit longer because they're turning in a bit wider, which is actually what Senna did. Senna drove on a classic racing line. He didn't actually create short corners. So I don't know why you're saying if Senna was also short corner. He wasn't. Prost was. Senna wasn't. Senna was the epitome of the Carlos Sainz art. He was in terms of what you saw going into a corner, Senna was very like Carlos Sainz, except that everything was even more accurate and more precise than even Carlos Sainz could dream of. That was the difference. But there was no way he was a short corner driver. So I'm a bit confused by the question. Amen, Peter. I'm not quite sure what that was too, but thank you very much anyway. Nearly the end of our live stream. We've been going on for quite a long time. Shall we rephrase that? I've been banging on for quite a long time, so it's almost time to stop, I think. And I've got to stop anyway. We got more of these questions about now when the constructors won, when the drivers' champion was not part of the team that won the constructors' championship. This is a super chat from No Time saying both in 07 and 10, the guy in third place won the championship. So a lot of that going on. Behavior Shadra had a super chat earlier. Curious to hear your take. So I got to go back and look for that. Sorry about that. Let me see that. That was the Moss super chat. With No Time super chat. Max super chat. Here's one. Yep, sorry about that. Here it is from Pahavish Chandra. Can you shed some light on Oscar's drop-off? How is Carlos faring so well versus Albon suddenly? Are you optimistic about the Alonso-Newey Honda pairing? Who's your favourite rookie? All right, well, this will be the last question because I've got a lot of questions in there. First of all, Oscar's drop-off. I think he became a victim of the amount of information out there, and what Lando was doing started to become the gold standard at McLaren when Lando started to go well, and Oscar started to be thinking too much, or the engineers got him thinking too much about what Lando was doing and what Oscar naturally felt in the car that needed to be done. And I think he lost a little bit of his, let's just be Oscar Piastri and drive this car the way I want to drive it. And it was too much. I think he was a victim of too much information and responding to that. And that coincided, and he was starting to look at Lando's info more and be affected by that when things started to go sideways from not necessarily Baku, but certainly from Singapore afterwards. When he had that bad race at Singapore, he was a bit deflated, didn't even want to get involved in chat with Tom Stallard about what they would do if the safety car came out towards the end of the race. But I guess between then and Austin, I guess between then, it was starting to look at what Lando was doing, where he was quicker, where he wasn't. And I think all that sort of piled up, and he still wasn't very happy inside because of what had happened at Singapore. And I think he got confused with the way to drive the car and not being the young surfer boy from Australia that should just get out there and have fun and enjoy it and drive the car really well. And then he got to Qatar, very nice fast corners where he could just nail the car and do what he does really well and be very committed to those fast corners. And suddenly Lando was making a few mistakes there, and suddenly he was quick relative to Lando. I think it was that. And now it's going to be fascinating to see if he carries that through to Abu Dhabi. I think that's going to be the most interesting thing, actually, whether Oscar can now continue to be as competitive as he was against Lando in Abu Dhabi on a circuit where they don't have as many corners that really suit the way he is as a driver, and he's going to have to be a little bit more detailed in everything he does on the slow corners, which is not been Oscar's strongest point, and that's going to be fascinating to see in this, the most important race of his career. How is Carlos faring so well versus Albon? Yeah, Albon's making lots of mistakes now under pressure from the pace of Carlos Sainz and how well Carlos is doing it, which is surprising for me in a way. I've always thought Albon was quick, long corner driver, very soft, nice inputs, and I've never seen him as a driver who makes a lot of mistakes, but I'm surprised now at how many errors he's making, because it can only be because Carlos is going as well as he is. And that, I think that just shows that he is a bit more reflexy than I imagined. And he was in a Red Bull, he was very, 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 very smooth with these transitions, with these applications. Williams, he's looking a little bit more spiky in everything he's doing, and I think that's all part of not having a really great foundation as a driver as to what he could be. There was a moment at Red Bull when maybe he could have started to shorten his corners and be something a bit special, and he didn't. And then at Williams, he sort of stagnated as a driver in that respect, and now the shortcoming of that is an obvious one, which is that if you try to brake as late as possible, get the power on as soon as possible, you're going to end up catching a curb on the left rear. You're going to end up with understeer that you then control with too much steering load or whatever it is, and it's going to lead to errors, and that's what we're seeing. Whereas Carlos Sainz has done an incredibly good job of putting up with a number of things that have gone wrong with the car and the team and the way they run it, and just stayed there as the Carlos Sainz that he knows he is, with great self-belief and confidence, running in that lovely sweet spot that he generated at Ferrari in the last 18 months of his time there, of driving just inside that area where you do start to make mistakes, but still quick, very quick, and therefore becoming silky smooth in everything that he's doing. Wide corners, early throttle application, high minimum speeds, but very, very consistent. And I think that is what is got at Albon. He's showing up these faults now in Albon at not progressing as a driver. Alonso, Newey, Honda. Yeah, very, very hard to beat that next year. Newey car will be good. Newey race operation will be good. Newey organisation between the chassis and the Honda people will be very good. And Alonso will get the best from it. And Newey, I think, will love working with Alonso because he's quick, he's a racer, he knows what he's talking about when it comes to strategy and race conditions. And so I see it as I see it as the pairing to beat, to be honest. And with Honda there, I think they're going to be as good as anyone. Adrian knows how to run Honda, having worked so closely with them at Red Bull and won races and championships with them. He knows their weak points, knows their strong points. He'll get the best from them. If Andy Carl stays there, my imagination is that he will move Andy over to that side, where Andy will do such a great job of running the PU side of the company. Although that may not be his current job description. I'd be shocked if Adrian doesn't try to get him to migrate into that area. And Adrian will have very good people around him who will take all the slack of having to deal with the stakeholders and sponsors. He'll have a team of people to do all that, and he'll have really good people working with him in terms of the FIA, politics, budget cap, all the boring stuff that a team principal has to deal with. He'll have good people dealing with all that. He'll delegate like crazy, and he'll end up doing exactly the same job he did at Red Bull, which is designing and running the car better than anybody on the planet. And it'll be woe betide anybody who underrates them. That's what I think will happen. I think he'll be really good. The only possible weak spot in that whole thing is how difficult it probably is to work for the Strolls, and possible dramas if Lance Stroll doesn't improve and continues to wallow around the back. Then obviously the father's going to get annoyed with Adrian, and Adrian's diplomacy skills will be pushed to their limit in dealing with Lawrence Stroll. That's the only weak spot that I can see. But Adrian's probably got a department to handle all that Stroll stuff as well, knowing him. UK Baz, let's make this the last question. Do you think Hamilton has lost his edge, or is it just a case of not being able to get to grips with the ground effect cars, or was it even what happened in 21? Yeah, I think what happened in 21 was a triple whammy. It was a horrendous shock, more shock than any race driver probably in the history of the sport has ever had to deal with, losing a championship that way, having just basically won the race that defined the championship for you. Shock number one. And I suppose as an adjunct to that, Mercedes not doing a very good job of following that through legally and getting a just result for that. Secondly, not being listened to when he said he would like to keep Valtteri Bottas in the car and going with George Russell, who he knew was going to be quicker than Bottas and therefore was going to deflect from his focus in his side of the garage. And thirdly, Mercedes then producing one of the worst cars they've ever built for 2022 and having to deal with all of that. And that's why I think it was just a shock year. And he started to change the way he drove. He started to, because he was so concerned about bouncing and porpoising and instability at the rear, that he started to sort of belt and brace the corner, turn in a bit later, brake in a straight line, make sure the car was fully settled before he committed to the power, and nothing he'd ever had to do before. And that's kind of still with him today, because he hasn't really had a better car. The car has got better, the Mercedes got better, and he started to drive it a little bit differently, but not a lot. And the Ferrari's back where they were in 22 almost. So he's still driving that way, a bit like a normal racing driver. And he's not ever going to be Charles Leclerc, who's still hungry as ever, has never won a world championship. And even on a really difficult day with a difficult car, is still going to find an absolute razor edge of one lap of performance to get it into Q3 and then maybe get a good race out of it or not. Lewis is not going to be on that razor edge ever now, because too much water's passed under that bridge of Lewis's. And at that age, he's always going to think about every decision he makes in the race car as a driver more than he did when he was 21. It's going to have a profit or loss, a win or a gain. If he does this, what's the downside? He's going to be a slight thinking process, which never would have been there. And that's inevitable because he's got road dust, he's got experience. That's what experience gives you, that ability to think. And usually in life, that's a great thing. As a race driver, sometimes maybe it's not. You just want to just do what Charles does and just drive the car. And so that's where he is. It would all change if he was in a very good car next year, and or even at Abu Dhabi, magically the Ferrari is a brilliant car, as good as the McLaren. Immediately Lewis will be right up there. He'll get pretty near the best from the car. But so long as it's a bad car, he will always be struggling now, in my opinion, to beat a very quick teammate like Charles Leclerc. One more question. Who's your favourite rookie? You mean this year? I would say... Well, I think for the fun of actually being a racing driver and appreciating everything he's got and where he's going and how well he's driven, I would say Oliver Behrman. And I like Ollie a lot. I think he's a good guy. I think he's never going to be a short corner driver, but he probably knows that, and he just loves being the driver that he is. Drives a little bit like James Hunt, I think, and he's a little bit like James Hunt anyway as a personality. And so, yeah, you know, I see a bit of James in him, a bit tall as well, isn't he, like James? So, yeah, I see that. I mean, in terms of respect, you got to say Isaac Hadjar, just really good. Bortoletto's done a pretty good job, I think. Where is he? How good is he? You know, is he as good as Felipe Massa eventually was? Probably not. Better than, let's think about the Brazilians, better than Wilson Fittipaldi, that's for sure. But not that Wilson was bad. No, Wilson was pretty good. You know, on a good car and a good day, he could be in the podium. Bortoletto, yeah, I don't know. Difficult to say, really. Yeah, I mean, he's going to be as good as almost as good as Nico Hülkenberg already, isn't he? We know that Nico's a podium finisher. Yeah, Bortoletto can win a Grand Prix in a good car for sure. I think he can win a race if the Sauber stroke Audi is a good car and they run it well. Bortoletto is worth keeping because I think he is a Grand Prix winner. Colapinto, I think he's been disappointing myself. I'm surprised that he has retained his drive. It can only be, I guess, because A, Flavio loves him, and B, there's some money behind it. But I don't think he's as good as, from what I've seen and the way they were as drivers on the way up, I don't think he's as good as Jack Doohan. And I think it's a shame that Jack Doohan was not given a proper chance by Alpine. A great shame. I think it's a loss for them and a loss for Formula One. I think he's a great guy, and Formula One would be better off for having Jack Doohan on any starting grid. He's a sort of driver that always does something dramatic. There's always something going on with Jack. I'm not saying he's a polished superstar that, you know, is always going to be Mr. Perfect, but he is a driver that would always give 100% in any dimension. And it's a great shame that we don't have him, and we should have him because he was signed to the team, and then they said, oh, he's going to be replaced by Colapinto for 5 races, and 5 races came and went, and they weren't very good for Colapinto, and that was the last we ever saw of Jack Doohan. Completely wrong. So that's that. Anyway, big thanks to everybody. Thanks for sitting with me, staying with me, being there and being a part of the show. Very kind of you to do that. And it's something that is growing and will be better. And we'll keep doing a lot of live streams after this last race. And then we're going to have the new cars coming up. We'll try and do the best job we can with all those coming along as well, because there'll be a lot to talk about with all these new cars. They're going to be... I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to tell when they just come out online, but you know, certainly be enough. So we look forward to that as well.